Some men believe power is a birthright. They wear their titles like armor, convinced that nobility flows in their blood rather than their choices. Duke Adrian Blackthorne was such a man, and on the night he cast aside his wife like discarded silk, he proved that even the mightiest can mistake cruelty for strength. What he failed to understand, standing in his gleaming castle while storm winds battered the walls, was that the people we break often remember longer than the people we love. Stay with me through this tale of ruin and resurrection, because what happened to the woman thrown into that rain will shake the very foundations of an empire. Bo? The grand ballroom of Blackthorne Castle blazed with 1,000 candles, their light reflecting off crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. It was the kind of opulence that whispered of old money and ancient bloodlines, the sort of wealth that took centuries to accumulate and only moments to squander. Duke Adrian Blackthorne stood at the center of it all, tall and commanding in his formal evening wear. His dark hair swept back from a face that had launched 1,000 whispered conversations among the empire's noble daughters. He was 32, in the prime of his power, and he knew it. Beside him stood his wife of 7 years, Lady Evelyn Ashford Blackthorne, wearing a gown of deep emerald that should have made her the envy of every woman in the room. Should have. But there was something in the way she held herself, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes downcast, that stripped away the elegance of expensive silk and replaced it with the posture of a prisoner awaiting sentence. She knew. Of course she knew. The entire court knew, had known for months. The servants whispered about it in corners. The visiting nobles exchanged knowing glances over their wine. Even the musicians playing their careful melodies seemed to understand that tonight was different, that something long brewing was about to spill over. Adrian raised his glass, the cut crystal catching the light. The crowd quieted, hundreds of faces turning toward him with practiced court smiles. Duke Adrian's voice carried across the ballroom with the easy confidence of a man who had never been denied anything. Here we go, Evelyn thought, her fingers tightening around her own glass until her knuckles went white. The storm outside was building. She could hear it through the thick walls, rain beginning to hammer against the tall windows. Your Grace, my lords and ladies, honored guests, Adrian began, his tone warm and welcoming in that particular way aristocrats learned from birth, the false intimacy that made strangers feel like confidants. Tonight we celebrate the spring equinox, the turning of seasons, the eternal cycle of endings and new beginnings. Evelyn felt her stomach drop. Endings and new beginnings. He was really doing this, here, now, in front of everyone. Count Mortimer, standing near the fireplace with his much younger third wife, leaned toward Lord Pemberton and muttered something behind his hand. Both men glanced at Evelyn, their expressions mixing pity with barely concealed entertainment. This was what the nobility lived for, not the balls and hunts and ceremonies, but the scandals, the falls from grace, the delicious spectacle of watching someone else's world collapse. Marriage, Adrian continued, swirling his wine thoughtfully, is the foundation of noble society. It is through marriage that alliances are forged, that bloodlines are strengthened, that dynasties endure through the ages. Each word felt like a stone dropping into still water, the ripples spreading outward. Evelyn could feel eyes sliding toward her, then quickly away when she met them. 7 years, she thought. 7 years of playing the perfect duchess, managing his household, hosting his insufferable political dinners, smiling through his barely concealed contempt. 7 years of sleeping in separate wings of the castle, of watching him return at dawn with perfume on his collar, of pretending not to hear the servants gossip about where he really spent his nights. But sometimes, Adrian said, his voice dropping to a more intimate register, sometimes the choices we make in our youth, the alliances arranged by our families, do not lead to the happiness and fulfillment that a man of position requires. A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Even for the scandal-hungry aristocracy, this was bold. You did not publicly humiliate your wife at your own ball. You kept your mistresses discreet, your indiscretions quiet. There were rules, protocols, the thin veneer of respectability that separated the nobility from common adulterers. Lady Ashford, my wife of 7 years, has been a dutiful companion. Adrian turned slightly toward Evelyn, and she saw in his eyes the same cold assessment he might give a horse he was considering putting down. Dutiful. She has managed my household with competence. She has represented the Blackthorn name at court functions with adequate grace. Adequate. Competence. Dutiful. Each word carefully chosen to diminish, to reduce 7 years of loyalty to a performance review for a mediocre servant. Evelyn stood perfectly still, every muscle in her body locked tight. Do not give them the satisfaction, she told herself. Do not cry. Do not scream. Do not let them see you break. However, duty without passion is merely obligation. Adrian's voice grew stronger, more certain, as if he were announcing a brilliant military victory rather than the destruction of his marriage vows. And a man in my position, with the weight of an ancient dukedom on his shoulders, cannot be expected to live a life of mere obligation. Here it comes. Which is why tonight, before all of you as witnesses, I announce my intention to petition the Emperor for an annulment of my marriage to Lady Evelyn Ashford on the grounds of incompatibility and the failure to produce an heir after 7 years of union. The ballroom erupted, not in gasps or shocked whispers, those had already been spent, but in excited chatter, in the rustle of expensive fabrics as nobles leaned toward one another to share their thoughts, in the barely suppressed laughter of those who had wagered on exactly this outcome. Evelyn felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. An annulment. Not even the dignity of a divorce, which at least acknowledged the marriage had existed. An annulment would erase her entirely, would declare that their union had never been valid in the first place, that these 7 years were a clerical error to be corrected. Furthermore, Adrian continued, raising his voice over the growing din, I am pleased to announce my engagement to Lady Cassandra Revel, daughter of Marquess Revel, a woman of exceptional beauty, intelligence, and noble breeding. And there she was, emerging from the crowd like an actress taking center stage. Lady Cassandra Revel, all golden curls and porcelain skin, wearing a gown of white and silver that proclaimed her innocence and purity, despite the fact that she had been warming Adrian's bed for the better part of 2 years. She glided toward the Duke with practiced grace, her smile radiant, her hand extended to receive his kiss like she was already duchess. The crowd's reaction transformed from scandal to celebration in an instant. Of course, Cassandra was the daughter of a marquess, far better connected than Evelyn's father had been. The old merchant Baron Ashford had bought his way into the lower nobility through trade and banking, a fact the aristocracy had never let Evelyn forget. New money, they called it with a sneer, as if coins earned through work were somehow tainted compared to wealth inherited from ancestors who had murdered their way to power centuries ago. Adrian took Cassandra's hand and pulled her close, kissing her knuckles while maintaining eye contact with his soon-to-be former wife. The message was clear. You were always replaceable. Evelyn stood frozen as the crowd surged forward to offer congratulations to the happy couple. Men clapped Adrian on the back. Women embraced Cassandra, already angling for position in the new duchess's favor. The musicians, reading the room perfectly, struck up a waltz. No one approached Evelyn. She stood alone in the center of that glittering ballroom, surrounded by hundreds of people, utterly invisible. Lady Pemberton, a woman Evelyn had considered a friend after years of afternoon teas and shared confidences, caught her eye from across the room. For a moment their gazes held, and Evelyn thought she saw something like sympathy flicker across the older woman's face. Then Lady Pemberton looked away, turning to laugh at something her husband had said, and Evelyn understood with perfect clarity. She was already a ghost, already erased from the social fabric of the court. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the windows with increasing violence. Thunder rumbled in the distance, growing closer. Evelyn set down her glass on a nearby table with exaggerated care, as if that small gesture of control could somehow anchor her to reality. Then she began walking toward the ballroom doors. Not running, not fleeing, walking with her head up and her spine straight, even as her heart hammered against her ribs and her vision blurred at the edges. Behind her, she heard Adrian's laugh, rich and satisfied, followed by Cassandra's musical giggle. The sound of a man who had gotten exactly what he wanted, exactly the way he wanted it. The hallway outside the ballroom was mercifully empty, lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. Evelyn's footsteps echoed as she walked, faster now, toward the residential wing. She needed to get to her chambers, needed to be somewhere private before the dam broke, and 7 years of suppressed rage and humiliation came pouring out. She almost made it. Leaving so soon, my lady? The voice came from a side corridor, dripping with false concern. Evelyn turned to see Lady Morgana Frost, one of Cassandra's closest friends and most vicious allies, leaning against the wall with the casual elegance of a predator that had already fed. "I find I have developed a headache," Evelyn replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "The festivities will continue without me. I am certain." "Oh, I am quite certain of that as well." Morgana stepped into the lamplight, her smile sharp as broken glass. "In fact, I imagine the festivities will be far more enjoyable without the presence of unwanted baggage dampening the mood." Evelyn felt something cold settle in her chest, something harder than grief. "Is there something you wanted, Lady Frost? Or are you simply exercising your talent for cruelty?" Morgana laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a graveyard. "I wanted to offer you some advice, actually, from one woman to another. When the annulment is finalized and you find yourself without title or position or prospects, perhaps you might consider returning to trade. I understand your father's people are quite comfortable among merchants and moneylenders. You would fit right in." There it was. The knife slipped between the ribs with surgical precision. Your father's people. Code for not really one of us, never truly noble, common blood dressed in silk. Something in Evelyn snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet finality of a door closing forever. "Thank you for the counsel," Evelyn said softly. "I will be certain to remember your kindness when I am deciding who deserves mercy and who deserves justice." Morgana's smile faltered slightly. "Was that a threat, my lady? How delightfully quaint. Threats require power, and you have none. By morning, you will not even have your name. We shall see." Evelyn turned and continued down the hallway, leaving Morgana staring after her with a puzzled frown. The Duchess reached her chambers and closed the door, leaning against it as her legs finally gave out and she slid to the floor in a rustle of emerald silk. For a long moment she simply sat there, breathing hard, listening to the storm rage outside. Then she began to laugh, high and wild and broken, because what else could she do? 7 years of her life spent building a marriage that had never existed, playing a role in a performance where she was always meant to be discarded in the final act. A knock at the door made her flinch. "My lady?" It was Helen, her personal maid, voice muffled through the heavy wood. "My lady, they're saying you must gather your things." Evelyn's laughter died in her throat. "What?" The door opened a crack and Helen slipped inside, her young face pale with distress. The Duke's steward came to the servants' quarters. He said you have 1 hour to pack your belongings and vacate the castle. He said you may take only what you can carry yourself, and that any items belonging to the Blackthorn family must remain behind. 1 hour. Evelyn felt the words wash over her like ice water. "He is throwing me out tonight? In this storm?" Helen knelt beside her, tears streaming down her face. "I am so sorry, my lady. They are saying the Duke wants no reminder of his previous marriage to interfere with his new engagement. They are saying Lady Cassandra has already selected these chambers as her own and wishes to move in immediately. Of course she does." Evelyn closed her eyes, fighting down the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. Of course Cassandra wanted these rooms, wanted to sleep in Evelyn's bed, wear Evelyn's title, erase every trace of her predecessor's existence. "Help me pack," Evelyn said, her voice hoarse. "Anything of value that was mine before the marriage. The rest can burn for all I care." They worked in frantic silence, Helen pulling gowns from wardrobes while Evelyn sorted through jewelry and personal items. Most of it would have to stay. Adrian had been generous with gifts in the early years, before the novelty wore off, and anything he had given her technically belonged to the Blackthorn estate. But there were a few pieces that had been her mother's, passed down through the Ashford line, and those she wrapped carefully in cloth and tucked into the single traveling case Helen had produced. 40 minutes later, Evelyn stood in the center of her chambers wearing a simple traveling dress and cloak, her hair hastily pinned, her life reduced to one small suitcase and a leather satchel containing what little money she had managed to keep separate from Adrian's control over the years. Helen was sobbing openly now. "Where will you go, my lady? Do you have family who will take you in?" Evelyn thought of her uncle, her father's brother, who ran a modest shipping concern in the southern ports. They had not spoken in years. Adrian had discouraged her from maintaining close ties with her merchant relatives. said it reflected poorly on the Blackthorn name. But surely Uncle Thomas would not turn her away. Surely. I will manage, Evelyn said, squeezing the young woman's hand. Do not worry for me, Helen. Worry for yourself. When the new Duchess arrives, see if you can secure a position in her household. You have done nothing wrong, and you deserve to keep your place here. A sharp knock at the door, followed by a man's gruff voice. Time's up, my lady. The Duke wants you gone. Evelyn picked up her suitcase and satchel, testing their weight. Everything I own, she thought. 26 years of life, reduced to what I can carry in 2 hands. She opened the door to find the Duke's steward, Lord Marston, flanked by 2 guards. The old man had the decency to look uncomfortable, but he did not waver. I am ready, Evelyn said. They walked in silence through the castle, down corridors Evelyn had traversed thousands of times as mistress of the household. Past the library where she had spent countless quiet afternoons, past the morning room where she had taken her breakfast and managed the household accounts, past the portrait gallery where images of Blackthorn ancestors stared down with painted disapproval, their faces frozen in permanent judgment. The music from the ballroom still echoed through the halls, slightly muffled by distance. They were dancing now, celebrating. Adrian and Cassandra would be at the center of it all, spinning in elegant circles while the court applauded their beautiful union. The main entrance hall was empty except for a few servants who quickly averted their eyes as Evelyn passed. Rain pounded against the great oak doors, and thunder cracked overhead like the sky itself was splitting open. Lord Marston gestured to the guards, who moved to open the doors. The storm rushed in immediately, wind and rain turning the entrance hall into chaos. You cannot possibly mean to send her out in this, Helen protested, appearing from nowhere to make one last stand for her mistress. She will be soaked through in minutes. At least let her wait until morning. Let her arrange proper transportation. The Duke's orders were quite clear, Marston said, though he looked pained. Lady Evelyn is to leave tonight. Immediately. Evelyn turned to Helen and managed a smile. It is all right. I have weathered worse than a little rain. It was a lie. She had never weathered anything close to this, but some part of her, buried deep beneath the shock and humiliation, was beginning to wake up. Some cold, clear-eyed part that understood that tears and pleading would change nothing, that the only path forward was through the storm. She stepped out into the night. The rain hit her like a physical blow, immediately soaking through her cloak and dress. The wind tore at her hair, pulling pins loose so that wet strands whipped across her face. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the castle grounds in stark white light. Behind her, the great doors slammed shut with a finality that echoed like a coffin lid closing. Evelyn stood there for a moment, suitcase in one hand and satchel in the other, rain streaming down her face and mixing with tears she had finally stopped trying to hold back. The gravel drive stretched before her, leading to the main gates nearly a quarter-mile away. Beyond that, the road to town. Beyond that, nothing she could clearly see. She started walking. Every step was agony. Her leather shoes, designed for dancing and drawing rooms, offered no protection against the puddles and mud. Her suitcase grew heavier with each yard, the rain-soaked leather handle cutting into her palm. Lightning continued to flash overhead, and thunder followed seconds later, the storm directly overhead now. Halfway to the gates, Evelyn slipped on the wet gravel and went down hard on one knee. Pain shot through her leg and she cried out, the sound immediately swallowed by the wind. For a moment she simply knelt there in the mud, rain battering her bent head, and thought about how easy it would be to just stay here, to let the storm take her, to surrender. Then she thought about Cassandra's triumphant smile, about Adrian's cold dismissal, about Lady Morgana's cruel advice to return to trade as if it were a punishment rather than her birthright. Evelyn pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the blood seeping through the torn fabric at her knee, and kept walking. By the time she reached the main gates, she could no longer feel her fingers. The gatekeeper, an elderly man named Thomas, who had always tipped his hat to her with genuine respect, emerged from his cottage with a lantern and an expression of absolute horror. Lady Evelyn, my God, what has happened? The Duke, Evelyn said through chattering teeth, has decided he no longer requires my presence in his household. I am leaving. Thomas stared at her, rain dripping from his own cap. You cannot walk to town in this. You will catch your death. At least let me stable your horse. Let me send for a carriage. I have no horse, Evelyn said. I have no carriage. I have nothing but what I carry, and I need to keep moving before I freeze to death standing here. She saw it then, the moment when Thomas made his calculation. He was a kind man, but he was also the Duke's employee, and in the morning he would still need his position. Helping the disgraced Duchess might cost him everything. "I understand," Evelyn said softly, saving him from having to refuse. "Thank you for your years of courtesy, Thomas. You were always a gentleman." She walked past him, through the gates, and onto the open road. The town was 3 miles away. 3 miles that might as well have been 300 in her current state. Evelyn made it perhaps a quarter of that distance before her legs gave out again, this time depositing her in a ditch beside the road where rainwater rushed past in a muddy torrent. She lay there, too exhausted to cry, too cold to care, and wondered if this was how it ended. Not with dignity or grace, but face down in a ditch while her husband danced with his new bride. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. A carriage approaching from behind, coming from the direction of the castle. For a wild moment, hope surged through her. Adrian had changed his mind. He had sent someone after her, had realized the cruelty of what he had done, was going to bring her back and beg forgiveness. The carriage slowed as it drew near, and through the rain-blurred window, Evelyn saw Cassandra's golden curls, saw the way the woman leaned forward to get a better look at the pathetic creature in the ditch. Then Cassandra's laugh, high and delighted, audible even over the storm. The carriage did not stop. It rolled past, splashing Evelyn with muddy water from the wheels, and disappeared into the darkness toward town. Cassandra was probably going to secure lodgings at the finest inn, to begin establishing her presence among the local gentry, to erase Evelyn's ghost from every corner of the duchy. Something in that moment hardened inside Evelyn's chest, crystallized into something new and dangerous. Not rage exactly, though rage was certainly there. Not grief, though she carried enough to drown in. Something colder, something patient, a promise. She pulled herself out of the ditch, her hands sinking wrist-deep in mud. She found her suitcase where it had fallen, now caked in filth. She shouldered her satchel and started walking again, one foot in front of the other, because stopping meant dying and dying meant Adrian won. The storm began to ease as she finally stumbled into the outskirts of town. The rain thinned to a drizzle, and the sky lightened from black to dark gray as dawn approached. Evelyn's mind had gone numb somewhere in the 3rd mile. Her thoughts reduced to the simple mechanics of movement. Left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. She found herself standing in front of a shabby inn called the Broken Wheel, its sign creaking in the dying wind. Through the grimy windows she could see a few early risers hunched over breakfast, merchants and travelers who had nothing to do with the aristocracy and its petty dramas. Evelyn pushed open the door and stepped inside. The common room fell silent. Every head turned to stare at the mud-covered, rain-soaked woman who had just entered their midst. The innkeeper, a heavy-set woman with shrewd eyes, came around from behind the bar. "We don't want no trouble here," she said carefully. "Whatever problems you got, you can take them somewhere else." Evelyn reached into her satchel with trembling fingers and pulled out a coin, one of the few she had left. Her voice came out raspy and raw. "A room, 1 night, and a basin of hot water if you can spare it." The innkeeper studied her for a long moment, taking in the quality of the cloak beneath the mud, the cut of the dress beneath the filth. Not common, then. Nobility fallen on hard times, which was either dangerous or profitable depending on how you played it. The coin disappeared into the woman's apron. Up the stairs, 2nd door on the left. "I will have my girl bring up the water." Evelyn climbed the narrow staircase, each step requiring conscious effort. The room was tiny, barely large enough for a bed and a washstand, but it had a door that locked and walls that blocked out the stairs. She collapsed onto the bed, still wearing her wet clothes, and stared at the water-stained ceiling. 7 years of her life. Gone. Her name, her position, her carefully constructed future. All of it stripped away in a single night because one man decided she was no longer useful. The serving girl brought the basin of water and left without a word. Evelyn forced herself to sit up, to wash the mud from her hands and face. In the cloudy mirror above the washstand, a stranger stared back at her. Hollow-eyed. Broken. No. Evelyn leaned closer to the mirror, searching her own reflection for something more than defeat. And there, beneath the exhaustion and trauma, she found it. The same steel that had gotten her through 3 miles of storm. The same cold promise she had made in the ditch. "You are not broken," she told her reflection. "You are just beginning." She thought about her father. The merchant baron who had built an empire from nothing, who had taught her numbers and negotiation before teaching her embroidery and etiquette. She thought about her mother, who had died when Eveline was 12, but who had whispered on her deathbed, "Never let them make you small." Eveline had spent 7 years making herself small, fitting into Adrian's idea of what a duchess should be. Quiet, decorative, convenient. She had buried the skills her father taught her, had pretended to be less intelligent than she was, had accepted crumbs of affection like they were feasts. No more. She pulled the satchel onto the bed and inventoried what she had. 3 gold coins, 2 silver, a handful of copper. Enough for perhaps a week of careful spending. Her mother's necklace, worth far more but too recognizable to sell locally. A few letters from her uncle, years old. And buried at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, the leather journal where her father had recorded the names and contacts of his business network before he died. She had kept it all these years, hidden from Adrian, who would have seen it as undignified, a reminder of her common roots. Now it felt like salvation. Eveline opened the journal, her father's careful handwriting swimming before her exhausted eyes. Portmasters in the southern cities, banking contacts in the capital, shipping agents across the continent. A whole world Adrian had never seen, had never valued, because it was built on work rather than bloodlines. This was her inheritance. Not the title that had been stripped away, but the network her father had spent a lifetime building. And unlike a noble marriage, it could not be annulled with a petition to the emperor. Outside, true dawn was breaking, weak sunlight pushing through the storm clouds. Somewhere across town, Cassandra was probably still sleeping in her luxurious inn, dreaming of her impending coronation as the new Duchess Blackthorn. Somewhere in his castle, Adrian was planning his wedding, secure in his power and position. Neither of them had any idea what was coming. Eveline pressed her palm against the mirror, her hand leaving a smudge on the glass. "Goodbye," she whispered to the broken duchess in the reflection. The woman who emerged from this room would be someone else entirely. Someone who understood that the people who throw you away never expect you to come back stronger. Someone who knew that revenge is not a dish served cold. It is served with a smile, wrapped in success they can never touch, delivered at the moment when they have the most to lose. A knock at the door made her turn. The innkeeper's voice came through the wood, cautious. "There is a man here asking after you, my lady. Says he is family. A Thomas Ashford, claims to be your uncle." Eveline stared at the door, her mind struggling to process the innkeeper's words. Uncle Thomas? Here. How did he even know where to find her? She stood on legs that still trembled from exhaustion and walked to the door, opening it to reveal the innkeeper's weathered face, and beyond her, in the narrow hallway, a tall man in his 50s wearing a merchant's practical coat and boots still wet from the road. Thomas Ashford looked exactly as she remembered from childhood, visits before her marriage, broad-shouldered, gray-haired, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and the calloused hands of someone who had spent decades moving cargo and counting coins. He took one look at her mud-stained dress and hollow eyes, and his jaw tightened. "Jesus Christ," he said quietly, "what did that bastard do to you?" The innkeeper cleared her throat. "I will be downstairs if you need anything, my lady." She left them alone in the hallway. Uncle Thomas stepped into the small room and closed the door behind him, his gaze sweeping over the cramped space with barely concealed anger. "I heard about the annulment announcement at breakfast this morning," he said without preamble. "The whole town is talking about it. How the Duke threw out his wife in the middle of the storm to make room for his whore. I came to the castle first, but they said you had already left. The gatekeeper told me which direction you walked." Eveline sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly too tired to maintain the facade of strength. "I have nothing, uncle. No position, no income, no prospects. By next week I will not even have my married name. The annulment will erase the last 7 years like they never happened." Thomas pulled the room's single chair closer and sat down heavily. "Your father would have killed that man with his bare hands for this. You know that, right? Your mother would have burned his castle to the ground." Despite everything, Eveline felt a ghost of a smile. Father always said violence was bad for business. Your father also said that when someone shows you who they really are, you believe them the first time and plan accordingly. Thomas leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "That Duke of yours, he has been showing you who he is for years. You just needed to be ready to see it." The words hit harder than Eveline expected. Because he was right. Adrian had never hidden his contempt for her common blood, his boredom with their marriage, his wandering attention. She had simply chosen to ignore it, to believe that if she was good enough, quiet enough, perfect enough, he would eventually value her. What an expensive delusion that had been. "I need to leave this town," Evelyn said, her voice steadier now. "The annulment will be formalized within weeks, and once it is official, I will have no legal protection. No money, no ability to access what little I had in my own name, because it will all revert to the Blackthorn estate as settlement." Thomas nodded slowly. "Come south with me, to Port Haven's Reach. I have a house there, a business that needs managing. You can work for me until you figure out what comes next. Work for you, not live off your charity, not hide in shame. Work." The word felt like oxygen. "What kind of work?" Evelyn asked. Thomas smiled, and for the first time since entering the room, he looked genuinely pleased. "The same work your father trained you for before that duke convinced you to forget everything you knew. Shipping manifests, trade negotiations, port logistics. I need someone I can trust to manage the accounting and handle supplier contracts while I'm at sea. Someone smart enough to spot when I'm being cheated and ruthless enough to do something about it. I have not done that kind of work in 7 years. Your father once told me you could calculate compound interest in your head faster than he could, with an abacus." Thomas stood and walked to the window, looking out at the slowly clearing sky. "Skills like that do not disappear just because some nobleman convinced you they were beneath your station. They just wait until you need them again." Evelyn thought about the leather journal in her satchel, her father's careful records of every contact and connection he had built over 40 years in trade. She thought about the numbers that still came to her unbidden when she overheard servants discussing household expenses, the instant calculations she could never quite turn off no matter how hard she tried to play the decorative duchess. "What is your business worth?" she asked. "Approximately." Thomas glanced back at her, one eyebrow raised. "Direct question." "I like it." "About 40,000 marks in assets. 3 ships, 2 warehouses, standing contracts with 15 major suppliers, annual profit of around 6,000 marks in a good year, 4,000 in a bad one." Evelyn's mind was already moving, adding and subtracting and projecting, modest but stable. Room for growth if managed correctly. More importantly, it was real. Not aristocratic fantasy wealth built on ancestral land and peasant labor, but actual money earned through skill and risk. "I will come with you," she said, "but not as your employee, as your partner." Thomas went very still. "Explain." Evelyn stood, ignoring the protest of her bruised knee, and crossed to her satchel. She pulled out her mother's necklace, the single most valuable thing she owned, and held it up to the weak morning light. The emeralds caught the sun, throwing green fire across the shabby room. "This is worth at least 5,000 marks, probably more. I want to invest it in your business in exchange for a partnership stake. 25% to start." Her uncle stared at her like she had grown a second head. "Evelyn, you cannot just... That necklace is your only security. If you sell it for business capital and the venture fails, you will have nothing. If I keep it as security and do nothing, I will still have nothing, just slower." Evelyn lowered the necklace but kept her gaze locked on Thomas. "Parasites like Cassandra do not work. They attach themselves to powerful men and drain them dry. I refuse to be that. I would rather risk everything and fail than spend the rest of my life as someone's cautionary tale." Thomas studied her for a long moment, and she could see him recalculating, reassessing. This was not the quiet girl who had married Duke Blackthorn 7 years ago. That girl had died somewhere on the muddy road between the castle and town. 20%, he said finally. "Your father would haunt me if I gave his only daughter a bad deal on her first business negotiation. And you work the accounts personally for the first year to prove you still remember how. If you can increase our profit margins by 15%, we renegotiate to 25% partnership. Done." They shook hands, his calloused palm rough against her soft skin. It felt like a baptism, like washing away 7 years of carefully maintained uselessness. "We leave tomorrow morning," Thomas said. "I have business at the Port Authority today, but tonight we will have dinner and you will tell me everything you remember about your father's network. Names, faces, who can be trusted and who cannot. Can you do that?" Evelyn nodded. "I have his journal, every contact, every connection, every favor owed and debt outstanding. He kept meticulous records. Of course he did. Thomas moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. One more thing. That Duke and his new woman, they are going to be the toast of society for a while. People are going to say terrible things about you. Lies, most of them. Some true things that will hurt worse. You need to be ready for that. Let them talk. Evelyn sat back down on the bed, exhaustion finally catching up with her. In 6 months, they will have forgotten I exist. In a year, they will be gossiping about someone else's scandal. The only thing that matters is what I build while they are busy congratulating themselves. Her uncle smiled, a fierce expression that reminded her suddenly of her father. You really are Thomas Ashford's daughter. I almost forgot. He left, and Evelyn was alone again in the small room. She lay back on the narrow bed and closed her eyes, but sleep would not come. Her mind was too busy spinning out possibilities, calculating risks, planning moves on a board that most people did not even know existed. By the time true night fell, she had made a list in her father's journal of every asset she could leverage and every weakness she needed to shore up. The necklace would provide initial capital, but she would need more, much more. Growing a shipping business from modest to significant required connections, contracts, and the kind of trust that took years to build. Unless you knew how to shortcut the process. Her father had taught her that business, at its core, was just organized gambling. You bet on cargo making it to port. You bet on prices holding steady. You bet on people keeping their word. The house always won in the long run, but individual players could beat the odds if they knew how to count cards. Evelyn had been counting cards her entire life. She had just pretended not to for 7 years because Adrian found it unattractive when she was smarter than his friends. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Evelyn washed as best she could with the remaining water, changed into the only other dress she had packed, a simple gray wool that had been her traveling outfit, and met her uncle in the common room. The innkeeper gave her a knowing look as she handed over a wrapped package. "Bread and cheese for the road," she said gruffly. "And a bit of advice. Men like that, Duke, they think throwing women away makes them powerful. They do not realize they are just teaching those women how much they do not need men like that." Evelyn took the package and pressed an extra copper coin into the woman's palm. "Thank you. For the room, and for not asking questions I could not answer. We have all been thrown away at some point, girl. The ones who survive are the ones who learn to throw back. The journey south took 3 days by coach, then another 2 by ship down the coast to Port Haven's Reach." Evelyn spent the time reading through her father's journal and listening to Thomas explain the current state of his business. The more she learned, the more a plan began to take shape in her mind. Port Haven's Reach was a sprawling coastal city, all narrow streets and salt-weathered buildings climbing up from the harbor. The Ashford warehouse sat on the eastern dock, a solid 3-story structure with the family name painted across the front in fading letters. Inside, organized chaos reigned. Crates and barrels stacked to the ceiling, workers shouting in 3 languages, the smell of tar and rope and distant spices. Thomas led her through the main floor to a small office on the 2nd level overlooking the warehouse floor. Papers covered every surface, and a ledger the size of a church Bible sat open on the desk. "This is where you will work," he said. "The books are current through last month, but we have had some discrepancies I have not had time to track down. 3% of our cargo keeps disappearing between loading and delivery. 3% was not unusual in the shipping trade. Theft was considered a cost of doing business. But 3% of 40,000 marks was 1,200 marks annually. Over 5 years, that was enough to buy another ship." "I will find it," Evelyn said. Thomas grinned. "I know you will. I'm going to meet with the harbor master about our import licenses. You have the office until I get back. Try not to fire anyone on your first day." He left her alone with the books. Evelyn sat down at the desk, pulled the ledger toward her, and opened it to the first page. For the next 6 hours, she barely moved. Her eyes tracked across columns of numbers, cross-referencing cargo manifests with delivery receipts, spotting patterns that did not quite align. Her father had taught her that numbers always told the truth. You just had to know what questions to ask them. By the time Thomas returned at sunset, she had found the leak. "One of your dock supervisors is running a side business," she said without looking up. "He loads our ships with the correct cargo, but he has been swapping our premium goods for cheaper substitutes before delivery and selling the difference to a black market dealer in the warehouse district. The substitutes are close enough in weight that the ship's manifests match, but our clients are getting inferior products and blaming it on our suppliers. Thomas grabbed the ledger and scanned the pages she had marked. How long has this been going on? At least 18 months. Probably longer, but your records before that are stored somewhere else. Total loss is approximately 7,000 marks, plus whatever damage to your reputation you have suffered from delivering substandard goods. Her uncle's face went dark red. That son of a bitch. I hired him 5 years ago. Trusted him. He has been stealing from me for a year and a half. Evelyn finally looked up from the desk. Do you want me to report him to the Port Authority or handle it internally? Internally. Thomas's voice was hard. I want our money back and I want an example made. If word gets out that the Ashford warehouse is easy to steal from, we will never stop the bleeding. They confronted the dock supervisor the next morning in front of the entire warehouse crew. The man denied everything until Evelyn calmly walked him through the evidence. Shipment dates, cargo weights, client complaints, and bills of sale from the black market dealer she had tracked down the previous evening through her father's network contacts. The supervisor, a heavy-set man named Garrett, who had spent the confrontation growing progressively paler, finally cracked when she produced a signed statement from the dealer implicating him directly. You cannot prove anything, Garrett said desperately. It is my word against some criminals. Evelyn smiled, and several workers took an involuntary step back. I do not need to prove it to a magistrate. I just need to prove it to every other shipping company in this port. By noon today, every warehouse master and dock supervisor in Havens Reach will know that Garrett sold out his employer for 7,000 marks. They will know the exact methods you used and the dealer you sold to. Do you think any of them will ever hire you again? Do you think your black market friends will protect you after you have been exposed as a liability? Garrett looked at Thomas with something like desperation. Please, I have a family. I made mistakes, but I need this job. You should have thought about your family before you stole from mine. Thomas's voice could have cut glass. You have two choices. One, you give us the name and location of every person in your theft ring, and you repay half of what you stole by selling off your personal assets and working for minimum wage at the docks until the debt is settled. Or two, I report you to the Port Authority, and you spend the next 5 years breaking rocks in a prison quarry. Choose. Garrett chose option 1. By the end of the day, 2 other employees had been implicated and dismissed, and the warehouse crew understood with perfect clarity that the new woman managing the books was not to be trifled with. Word spread fast in the tight-knit world of port commerce. Within a week, other shipping companies were sending representatives to the Ashford warehouse with curious looks and cautious questions. Who was this woman who had cracked a year-long theft operation in 6 hours? Where had she come from? Evelyn gave them nothing. She kept her head down, worked the numbers, and slowly began reaching out to her father's old contacts. A textile supplier in the eastern provinces who remembered Thomas Ashford's daughter as a child. A spice merchant in the southern islands who owed her father a favor from 20 years past. A banker in the capital who had partnered with her father on 3 successful ventures before his death. One contact led to another. One favor generated 2. One successful deal built credibility for the next. And through it all, Evelyn never mentioned her former title, never referenced her marriage to Duke Blackthorne, never gave anyone a reason to connect the brilliant young merchant managing the Ashford accounts to the disgraced duchess who had vanished from society 6 months earlier. She became invisible in plain sight, just another sharp trader in a city full of them. 6 months after arriving in Havens Reach, Evelyn had increased the Ashford business profit margins by 23%. Thomas honored his promise and renegotiated their partnership to 25% equity. They celebrated with a bottle of wine in the warehouse office while workers loaded the newest ship for a run to the southern archipelago. You have a gift for this, Thomas said, refilling her glass. Your father had it too. The ability to see 3 moves ahead while everyone else is still figuring out the current board. Evelyn sipped the wine, letting the warmth settle in her chest. She had learned something important in the past 6 months, something that would have horrified her 7-year-ago self. She was good at this. Better than good. She understood commerce in her bones, the way some people understood music or mathematics. It was a language she spoke fluently, a game she played instinctively. And unlike marriage to a duke, it could not be annulled on someone else's whim. I want to expand, she said abruptly. 3 ships are not enough. We need 6 within 2 years, 10 within 5. We need contracts with the imperial government for military supply runs. We need warehouses in at least 3 other port cities. We need to be big enough that when people say shipping in this empire, they think of the Ashford name first. Thomas set down his glass and studied her. That kind of growth requires serious capital. We are talking loans, investors, risk. I know. Evelyn met his eyes steadily. I also know that staying small is the fastest way to get crushed by bigger competitors. We have momentum. We need to use it before someone else does. What happened to the quiet girl who married a duke? She died in a ditch on a muddy road. What you see now is what crawled out. Her uncle laughed, a sound of genuine delight. Then let us talk about investors. I know a few merchants who might be interested in backing a venture with this kind of upside, but you need to be ready to handle questions about your background, your experience, why they should trust you with their money. Tell them I am Thomas Ashford's daughter, and I tripled his profit margins in 6 months. If that is not enough, they are not the right investors. Over the next year, the Ashford shipping empire grew. Carefully at first, then with increasing boldness. Evelyn secured a contract with the Imperial Navy for supply runs to coastal fortifications. She negotiated exclusive trade agreements with 2 major spice producers in the archipelago. She opened a second warehouse in a northern port city and began building relationships with overland trading companies. Every success built on the last. Every connection strengthened the network. Every risk that paid off emboldened her to take the next one. And through it all, she thought about Adrian, not constantly, not obsessively, but like a steady pulse beneath everything she did. There was the knowledge that somewhere, in his castle and his courts and his comfortable aristocratic bubble, Duke Adrian Blackthorne believed he had won. Believed that throwing away his common-born wife had elevated him. Believed that Evelyn had disappeared into the obscurity she deserved. That belief sustained her through 18-hour workdays and brutal negotiations and the 1,000 small humiliations of being a woman in a male-dominated industry. Every time a merchant tried to pat her hand and explain basic economics. Every time an investor suggested she find a husband to manage her business interests. Every time a competitor assumed she was someone's secretary instead of the owner. She smiled through it all and took their money and their contracts and their underestimation, and she turned it into power they would never see coming. 2 years after arriving in Haven's Reach, the Ashford Shipping Company controlled 8 ships and 4 warehouses across 3 provinces. Annual profits had climbed to 35,000 marks, a nearly 6-fold increase from when Evelyn had first walked into that warehouse office. She and Thomas were now equal partners, and whispers in trade circles spoke of the mysterious woman who had transformed a modest family business into a rising commercial power. But Evelyn was not satisfied. 8 ships was impressive. It was not enough to challenge the real giants of imperial commerce. It was not enough to make the aristocracy take notice. It was not enough to make Adrian regret. She needed banking. She needed political connections. She needed to stop thinking like a merchant and start thinking like an empire. On a cold morning in early autumn, Evelyn traveled to the capital for the first time since her annulment. She had changed in the past 2 years, her soft duchess body hardened by long days of physical labor in the warehouse, her face more angular, her eyes colder. She wore simple merchant's clothes and kept her hair covered, and no one in the bustling capital streets gave her a second glance. She spent 3 days meeting with bankers and investors, laying the groundwork for the next phase of expansion. On the 4th day, she attended a commercial auction where a struggling shipping company was selling off its assets to pay debts. That was where she saw them. Duke Adrian Blackthorne and his Duchess Cassandra, entering the auction house in a swirl of expensive fabrics and aristocratic entitlement. They looked every bit the golden couple. Adrian still handsome in his tailored coat, Cassandra radiant in a gown that probably cost more than most families earned in a year. They also looked worried. Evelyn watched from the back of the auction hall as Adrian bid on a warehouse, his movements jerky and aggressive. He was trying to look confident, but she had been married to him for 7 years. She knew his tells, the way his jaw clenched when he was stressed, the way his left hand kept moving to his pocket, where he used to keep his money purse. He was bleeding capital. Something had gone very wrong with the Blackthorne finances. Evelyn listened to the whispered conversations around her and pieced together the story. Cassandra's expensive tastes, Adrian's attempts to buy influence with lavish parties and political contributions, several bad investments in foreign trade ventures that had collapsed spectacularly. The slow, grinding drain of maintaining a lifestyle built on aristocratic pride rather than actual income. The Blackthorns were not broke. Not yet. But they were sliding, and everyone in the commercial world could smell it. Adrian won the warehouse bid, though he paid more than it was worth. Evelyn watched him sign the papers with a slight tremor in his hand, watched Cassandra whisper something sharp in his ear that made his face go tight. They were fighting. The golden couple was cracking. Evelyn left the auction house and went straight to her banker. Within a week, she had purchased controlling interest in the very company that had been forced to sell the warehouse to Adrian. Within a month, she had quietly approached 3 of Adrian's other creditors and bought up their outstanding loans against Blackthorn properties. She was patient, she was careful, and she was absolutely ruthless. Over the next 6 months, while Adrian scrambled to shore up his deteriorating financial position, Evelyn systematically bought up debt, secured contracts that cut into Blackthorn trade revenues, and used her network to spread carefully chosen rumors about the Duke's instability as a business partner. Nothing illegal. Nothing that could be traced directly back to her. Just the invisible hand of commerce slowly tightening around Adrian's throat. Thomas confronted her about it one evening in the warehouse office. "You are targeting him specifically. The Duke. This is not just business anymore." Evelyn did not look up from the contract she was reviewing. Business is always personal. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying. He could fight back. He has connections, political power. Had connections. Has power. Past and present tense. Evelyn set down her pen and met her uncle's worried gaze. "Do you know what I learned in 7 years of being a duchess? The aristocracy is a beautiful facade built on debt and denial. They spend money they do not have to impress people they do not like, all while pretending they are superior to the merchants and bankers who actually make their lifestyle possible. Adrian's entire world rests on credit and inheritance. I am attacking the foundation, not the facade. And when it collapses? When it collapses, I want to be there to watch." Evelyn's voice was flat, emotionless. "I want him to know that the woman he threw away in the rain is the one holding the knife." Thomas sighed and poured himself a drink. "Your father would be proud of your business sense. I am not sure what he would think of your methods. My father never had someone publicly humiliate him and strip away his identity. I do not need his approval. I need his skills, and I already have those." Her uncle left without another word. Evelyn returned to her contracts and her calculations and her carefully constructed vengeance. 3 years after being thrown out of Blackthorn Castle, Evelyn owned 14 ships, 6 warehouses, and held debt markers on nearly 30% of the Duke's remaining liquid assets. The Ashford name was known from the northern provinces to the southern archipelago. Trade ministers consulted her on policy. The imperial treasury used her shipping lines for sensitive cargo. She had transformed her father's modest business into a commercial powerhouse worth over 200,000 marks. She was by any measure one of the wealthiest and most influential merchants in the empire. And Duke Adrian Blackthorn still had no idea who was destroying him. The endgame began at the Imperial Spring Auction, an annual event where distressed aristocrats sold off assets to pay debts, and desperate nobles tried to buy respectability. Evelyn received the auction catalog 6 weeks in advance and saw immediately that Adrian had been forced to list his family's summer estate, 3 trade contracts, and his late mother's jewelry collection. He was desperate. Cassandra had finally bled him dry. Evelyn attended the auction wearing a gown that cost more than many nobles spent in a month, her hair dressed with emeralds that dwarfed anything in the Blackthorn collection. She sat in the front row with other major commercial players, her presence commanding attention from every social clamor in the room. Adrian did not recognize her. How could he? The woman he had married was soft and deferential. This woman was hard edges and cold calculation, surrounded by bankers and trade ministers who deferred to her opinion. When the Blackthorn properties came up for bid, Evelyn let others start the process. Let them think this was just another commercial opportunity. Then, when the bidding slowed, she raised her hand and named a number that made the entire room go quiet. Adrian's head whipped around. He saw her for the first time, really saw her, and Evelyn watched the blood drain from his face as recognition finally hit. The auctioneer stammered through the rest of the process, but it was over. Evelyn had purchased everything Adrian had put up for sale, at prices generous enough that no one could claim she was taking advantage, but devastating in their completeness. She owned pieces of his legacy now, could do with them as she pleased. As the auction hall began to empty, Adrian walked toward her with the mechanical stiffness of a man in shock. Cassandra trailed behind him, her perfect face marred by confusion and growing horror as she realized who this powerful merchant woman actually was. "Evelyn," Adrian said, and his voice cracked on her name. She looked at him with the same cool assessment he had given her 3 years earlier when announcing their annulment. "Your Grace, how unexpected to see you here." "What are you doing?" The question came out strangled. How did a common merchant's daughter build an empire while you destroyed yours?" Evelyn's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "I learned from my father that actual work produces actual results. You should try it sometime." Cassandra stepped forward, her eyes flashing with the same cruelty Evelyn remembered from their brief encounter in the castle hallway. "This is hardly appropriate behavior for someone of your former station. Show some dignity." "My former station?" Evelyn's laugh was ice. "You mean the station your husband annulled, erased, and threw away like garbage? That station?" "No, I think I prefer my current one. It comes with actual power instead of the illusion." Adrian's hands were shaking now. "The properties you just bought, my mother's jewelry, you cannot—" "I can and I did. The sale was legal, the money has transferred, and what I choose to do with my lawfully purchased assets is no concern of yours." Evelyn stood, gathering her things. "Enjoy the rest of the auction, Your Grace. I hear there are some lovely minor holdings up next if you can scrape together enough credit." She walked away, surrounded by her associates, leaving Adrian standing in the middle of the auction hall like a man who had just watched his world catch fire. Cassandra was hissing something at him, her face ugly with rage, but Evelyn did not look back. Outside, her carriage waited. As she climbed inside, she caught sight of her reflection in the window glass. The woman staring back was unrecognizable from the broken duchess who had crawled out of a ditch 3 years ago. That woman was gone. What remained was something new, something dangerous. And she was just getting started. The carriage ride back to her hotel should have felt like victory. Evelyn sat in plush leather seats, surrounded by the trappings of her success, watching the capital's elegant streets roll past through rain-streaked windows. She had just publicly humiliated Adrian Blackthorne in front of the empire's commercial and social elite. She had purchased his family legacy like it was discounted inventory at a warehouse clearance. She had seen the exact moment his world shattered behind his eyes. So why did her hands keep trembling? Victory was supposed to taste sweet. This tasted like ash and unfinished business. Because seeing Adrian broken was only half of what she needed. The other half required him to understand exactly how far he had fallen, to recognize that the woman he had thrown away in the rain was the architect of his destruction. And that understanding, that perfect moment of realization, had flickered across his face for barely 3 seconds before Cassandra had started hissing poison in his ear. 3 seconds. 3 years of work for 3 seconds of recognition. It was not enough. The hotel suite awaited her, all polished marble and imported furniture that cost more per night than most families earned in a month. Evelyn dismissed her attendants and stood at the window overlooking the capital's glittering skyline. Somewhere out there, Adrian was returning to whatever remained of his crumbling estate. Somewhere out there, Cassandra was already planning how to extract herself from a sinking ship. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Thomas, his face grim in the hallway lamplight. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. Evelyn stepped aside to let him enter. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that involves imperial investigators asking questions about our sudden expansion and where exactly our capital came from." Thomas threw a document on the table, official seals glaring red against cream paper. Someone filed a formal complaint alleging that the Ashford Shipping Company engaged in illegal market manipulation and debt acquisition through fraudulent means. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Who filed it? Duke Adrian Blackthorne. Thomas's voice was flat. And he has friends in the Imperial Trade Ministry who are apparently willing to listen. They are launching a full audit of our books going back 3 years. Let them audit. Evelyn crossed to the table and scanned the document. Every transaction was legal. Every contract was legitimate. I have been meticulous precisely because I knew he might try something like this. Legal and ethical are not always the same thing in the eyes of aristocrats, Thomas said quietly. You systematically destroyed a duke's financial position over 3 years while building your own empire. Even if every individual action was technically lawful, the pattern looks like targeted economic warfare. And economic warfare against the nobility is something the emperor takes very seriously. The words hit harder than Evelyn wanted to admit. She had been so focused on the mechanics of revenge that she had not fully considered how it would look to the imperial power structure. Merchants were supposed to know their place. They could become wealthy, even influential, but they were never supposed to weaponize that wealth against the aristocracy itself. She had crossed a line, and now the line was fighting back. "How bad is it?" she asked. Thomas rubbed his face with both hands. "If they find evidence of coordinated market manipulation, they can seize assets, revoke trade licenses, and ban you from imperial commerce entirely. Worst case, they prosecute you for economic treason against the noble class." Economic treason. The phrase was almost funny in its absurdity. Adrian could throw her out in a storm and face zero consequences, but when she fought back with ledgers instead of lawsuits, suddenly it was treason. "I need to speak with the investigators directly," Evelyn said. "Explain our position. Show them the documentation." "I already tried. They are not interested in hearing from a merchant." Thomas's expression was bleak. "They want testimony from credible witnesses about your intentions and methods. And the only people who know your full intentions are you, me, and apparently Duke Blackthorn, who is painting you as a vindictive ex-wife using commercial power to punish him for illegal annulment. So we find other witnesses, people who can testify to our legitimate business practices. Evelyn, most of our major expansion happened through aggressive acquisition of debt and contracts that directly competed with Blackthorn interests. Even our most legitimate deals will look suspicious under that lens." Thomas sat heavily in one of the expensive chairs. "This is not about truth. This is about power. The aristocracy does not like seeing one of their own taken down by someone they consider beneath them. They're going to make an example of you." The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls pressing in. Everything she had built over 3 years, 14 ships, 6 warehouses, contracts with half the empire's major trade houses, all of it could disappear with a stroke of an imperial pen. Not because she had done anything illegal, but because she had forgotten the fundamental rule of survival in an aristocratic empire. You could play the game, but you could never win against the people who wrote the rules. "How long do we have?" Evelyn asked. "The investigation starts formally in 2 weeks. If they find cause, arrests and asset seizures could happen within a month." Thomas met her eyes. "We need to prepare for the possibility that you might have to flee the empire entirely. I have contacts in the Eastern Kingdoms who might offer sanctuary." Flee. The word tasted like defeat. Run away like a criminal because she had dared to be better at business than a duke. "No." Evelyn's voice was hard. "I am not running. I did not survive being thrown out in the rain just to run the first time someone threatens me with legal consequences." "Then what?" Thomas's frustration boiled over. "You cannot fight the imperial government. You cannot outmaneuver the entire aristocratic class. They have already decided you are guilty. The investigation is just theater to make it look legitimate. Maybe I cannot outmaneuver them, but I can make surrendering more expensive than letting me go." Evelyn began pacing, her mind racing through possibilities. "We have contracts with the Imperial Navy. We supply 3 coastal fortifications and 2 military outposts. If they seize our assets, those supply lines collapse. They will find another supplier. Not quickly enough, and not without revealing to the military that the Trade Ministry is willing to sabotage national defense to protect a duke's wounded pride." Evelyn stopped pacing and turned to face her uncle. "We make this political. We force them to choose between punishing me and maintaining critical infrastructure. That is incredibly dangerous. If you threaten the Empire's military supply, they will not just seize your assets, they will arrest you for actual treason. Only if I threaten. What I am going to do is explain, very publicly, that the Ashford Shipping Company is currently the sole provider for several critical military contracts, and that any disruption to our operations would create immediate supply shortages that could take months to resolve. I am not threatening anything. I am simply stating facts about the consequences of their choices." Thomas stared at her like she had lost her mind. "You are going to publicly dare the Imperial Trade Ministry to destroy you. I am going to make them understand that destroying me costs more than it is worth." Evelyn grabbed paper and began writing. We need to prepare documentation of every military contract, every supply timeline, every single point where our business intersects with imperial defense. And we need to get it to someone in the War Ministry who has the political weight to push back against the Trade Ministry. Who did you have in mind? General Marcus Thorne. He commanded the coastal defenses during the border conflicts 5 years ago. His fortifications depend on our supply lines. If anyone has incentive to prevent this investigation from destroying us, it is him. Thomas looked at the growing list of documents she was compiling. This might work, or it might just make them angrier. Probably both. Evelyn signed her name at the bottom of a formal letter requesting an emergency meeting with the general. But anger is temporary. Supply chain collapse during a period of potential military tension is permanent. They will choose pragmatism over pride if we force their hand correctly. The next week was a blur of frantic preparation. Evelyn compiled 3 years of contracts, manifests, delivery schedules, and client testimonials into a comprehensive portfolio demonstrating that the Ashford Shipping Company was not just profitable, but essential to imperial operations. She documented every military supply run, every on-time delivery, every instance where her ships had gone above and beyond contract requirements to ensure critical cargo reached its destination. She also began quietly making contact with other major merchants and traders who had their own reasons to fear arbitrary imperial investigations. Building a coalition was risky. It could look like organizing resistance, but it also created witnesses who could testify that she was not an isolated problem, but part of a larger commercial infrastructure the empire could not afford to destabilize. General Marcus Thorne agreed to meet her on the 8th day. His office was in the military quarter of the capital, a stark contrast to the gilded halls of the Trade Ministry. The general himself was in his 60s, gray-haired and scarred, with the tired eyes of a man who had seen too many battles and politicians. Miss Ashford. He gestured to a chair across from his plain wooden desk. I understand you are having difficulties with the Trade Ministry. They are attempting to destroy my business on behalf of a duke who made poor financial decisions and wants someone to blame. Evelyn sat without waiting for permission. Your coastal fortifications depend on my ships for 60% of their supply runs. If the Trade Ministry seizes my assets, those supply lines collapse within 2 weeks. I am aware. Thorne leaned back in his chair. I am also aware that you systematically dismantled Duke Blackthorn's commercial interests over a 3-year period in what appears to be a calculated act of economic revenge. It was calculated. It was also entirely legal. Every contract, every debt acquisition, every business decision followed imperial commercial law to the letter. Evelyn kept her voice steady. The Trade Ministry is not investigating me for illegal activity. They are investigating me for embarrassing a nobleman. There is a difference. The general was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those tired eyes. Do you know why the empire maintains such strict separation between the commercial and noble classes? Because the aristocracy fears anyone with real power that was not inherited. Because empires are built on stability, and stability requires clear hierarchies. Thorne stood and walked to the window overlooking the military parade grounds. When merchants start taking down dukes, even legally, it threatens the social order. And threatened social orders tend to become unstable social orders. So I'm supposed to accept being destroyed because my success threatens stability? Evelyn's voice sharpened. That is not justice. That is just protecting people who never earned their power from people who did. You are not wrong, but you are also not going to win this fight through moral arguments. Thorne turned back to face her. What you need is leverage, something that makes prosecuting you more trouble than it is worth. I have leverage. Your supply lines, which I can replace with some difficulty, but not impossibility. The general's expression was almost sympathetic. You need something bigger, something that directly threatens the people making these decisions, not just creates inconvenience. Evelyn felt the ground shifting beneath her. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that Duke Blackthorn is not the only nobleman with financial problems. Half the aristocracy is drowning in debt to various merchants and banks. If those debts were to be called in simultaneously in response to your persecution, it would create a financial crisis that could destabilize the entire noble class. Thorne returned to his desk and sat down. That would be leverage. That would also be economic warfare on a scale that would definitely qualify as treason. Only if you organize it, If it happened organically, as independent merchants protecting their own interests after seeing how the empire treats successful traders, that is just market forces. The general slid a folder across the desk. These are the names of 12 major commercial lenders who hold significant debt from various noble houses. If you were to make them aware of your situation and they independently decided to secure their positions by calling in outstanding loans, well, that would be unfortunate timing, but hardly your fault. Eveline opened the folder and felt her mouth go dry. The names inside represented the backbone of imperial commercial lending. If even half of them called in their noble debt simultaneously, it would trigger a cascade that could bankrupt dozens of aristocratic families within weeks. This would destroy people who have nothing to do with my investigation. It would create conditions where the Trade Ministry has to choose between prosecuting you and preventing economic collapse. Thorne's voice was a matter of fact. That is how you survive when the powerful want you destroyed. You make your destruction cost more than they are willing to pay. For a long moment, Eveline just stared at the folder. This was so far beyond her original plan. She had wanted to hurt Adrian to make him understand what he had taken from her. She had not wanted to burn down the entire aristocratic financial system. But they had not given her a choice, had they? They had decided she was guilty before the investigation even started. They were going to destroy everything she had built, not because she had broken laws, but because she had broken an unspoken rule: never beat your betters. And if she did nothing, if she accepted her fate with quiet dignity, she would lose everything. Again. Still. Forever. "How long do I have to make this decision?" she asked quietly. "The formal investigation starts in 6 days. If you're going to act, it needs to be before then." Thorne closed the folder. "After that, anything you do will look like retaliation rather than self-preservation. 6 days to decide whether to trigger an economic catastrophe. 6 days to choose between her own survival and the livelihoods of hundreds of people who had never even heard her name." Eveline stood, taking the folder with her. "Thank you, General, for your honesty, if nothing else. Miss Ashford." Thorne's voice stopped her at the door. "The Empire is not kind to women who refuse to know their place. If you do this, there is no going back. You will have enemies in every noble house from here to the borders. I already have those enemies. They just have not acknowledged me yet." Eveline opened the door. "At least this way they will remember why they should have left me alone." She spent the next 3 days in her hotel suite, staring at the list of names, trying to convince herself there was another way. Thomas came and went, bringing updates on the investigation's progress. It was proceeding exactly as they feared. Imperial auditors were already seizing preliminary documents, and rumors were spreading through commercial circles that Eveline Ashford was about to be made an example of. On the 4th day, a messenger arrived with a letter. Eveline recognized Cassandra's handwriting before she even opened it. The letter was brief and brutal. It congratulated Eveline on her impressive business success and noted how unfortunate it was that such success would be stripped away by imperial decree. It mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Duke Blackthorne would be happy to speak to the investigators on Eveline's behalf if she were willing to publicly apologize for her inappropriate business conduct and transfer certain assets back to the Blackthorne estate as restitution. It was extortion dressed in aristocratic courtesy, an offer to save her if she prostrated herself and handed over everything she had built. Eveline read the letter 3 times, then held it over a candle flame and watched it burn. That night she began writing letters to every name in General Thorne's folder. The letters were carefully worded, mentioning her situation only in passing, focusing instead on recent trends in noble debt default and suggesting that prudent lenders might want to secure their positions given the unstable political climate. She never explicitly told them to call in their loans. She simply provided information and let them draw their own conclusions. Thomas found her just before dawn, surrounded by sealed envelopes. "You are really doing this. They gave me no choice." Eveline signed the last letter and added it to the pile. "If I do nothing, I lose everything, and they learn that merchants can be destroyed whenever convenient. If I do this, at least the next woman who dares to succeed will know she has weapons. This is not about the next woman. This is about you wanting to burn it all down because you cannot save yourself." "Maybe." Eveline met her uncle's eyes. "Or maybe it is about refusing to die quietly just to make powerful people comfortable. They want me destroyed? Fine. But I'm going to make them work for it." The letters went out by private courier that morning. Within 48 hours, the empire's commercial lending networks began to shift. Debts that had been extended indefinitely suddenly came due. Noble families received notices that their grace periods were expiring. Banks that had been patient with aristocratic clients abruptly demanded payment in full. It started as a trickle. Then it became a flood. Within a week, 12 noble houses were facing immediate bankruptcy. Within 2 weeks, the imperial treasury was receiving emergency requests for intervention to prevent wholesale collapse of the aristocratic financial system. Within 3 weeks, the Trade Ministry's investigation into Evelyn Ashford had been quietly suspended pending resolution of the larger crisis. Evelyn watched it all unfold from her hotel suite, receiving hourly updates from contacts throughout the capital. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a cold understanding that she had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. She had become exactly what they feared, a commoner with enough power to hurt them back. The summons came on the 21st day. Not from the Trade Ministry or the imperial investigators, but from the emperor himself. A formal request for Evelyn's presence at the palace to discuss matters of imperial economic stability. Thomas nearly had a heart attack when he read it. They are going to arrest you, execute you for economic treason. This is a trap. Possibly. Evelyn was already dressing for the meeting, choosing her most conservative and expensive gown. Or they are going to negotiate. Either way, I have to go. Refusing a direct imperial summons would definitely be treason. Let me come with you. As legal counsel. This is not a legal matter anymore, uncle. This is political. If they want me dead, having you there will not stop them. If they want a deal, you being there will just complicate things. Evelyn hugged him tightly. If I am not back by nightfall, take everything liquid in our accounts and run. Do not try to save me. Evelyn, I mean it. You gave me a chance when I had nothing. Do not throw your life away trying to save mine if it comes to that. The imperial palace was exactly as Evelyn remembered from her brief time as a duchess. All marble columns and gold leaf and the ostentatious display of power that people with real power never needed to advertise. She was escorted through hallways she had walked years ago on Adrian's arm, back when she still believed that being married to a duke meant something. The emperor's private study was surprisingly modest compared to the palace's public spaces. Shelves of books lined the walls, and the furniture was comfortable rather than ceremonial. The emperor himself was in his 70s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing simple robes that probably cost more than Evelyn's entire wardrobe. Miss Ashford, he gestured to a chair. Or should I say former Lady Blackthorn? Evelyn sat carefully. Just Miss Ashford, Your Majesty. The annulment was quite clear on that point. Yes, about that annulment. The emperor poured 2 glasses of wine and slid one across the desk to her. Duke Blackthorn filed a petition claiming incompatibility and failure to produce an heir. You did not contest it. I had neither the resources nor the political capital to fight it at the time. And now? The emperor sipped his wine. Now you have enough resources and capital to bring my entire aristocracy to its knees. Quite the transformation for someone who was thrown out of a castle in a storm 3 years ago. So he knew. Of course he knew. Evelyn took a small sip of her own wine, buying time. I built a successful business using the skills my father taught me. Nothing I did was illegal. Nothing you did was illegal, the emperor agreed. Everything you did was calculated to destroy a specific nobleman while destabilizing the financial foundations of the aristocratic class. Also not illegal, technically. Just spectacularly dangerous for someone in your position. My position. Evelyn set down her glass. Your Majesty, what exactly is my position? I am not nobility. I was made very clear on that point when my marriage was annulled. I am a merchant, operating within imperial commercial law. If my success threatens aristocrats who cannot manage their own finances, perhaps the problem is not my success. The emperor actually laughed. You sound like your father. Thomas Ashford made that exact argument to me 20 years ago when some duke accused him of unfair trade practices. He won that argument, you know. I ruled that merchants who followed the law should not be punished for being better at business than nobles. Then why am I here? Because your father never tried to trigger systemic collapse of the noble financial system. The emperor's humor faded. What you orchestrated 3 weeks ago came within days of bankrupting 40% of my peerage. That goes beyond business competition into something that looks very much like coordinated economic assault. It was self-defense. They were going to destroy me for embarrassing Duke Blackthorn. They were going to investigate you, the Emperor corrected. Big difference. You escalated from facing an audit to threatening the foundations of imperial aristocracy. That escalation is why you are sitting in my study instead of safely running your shipping business. Evelyn felt ice settle in her chest. So this is where I learn my punishment. This is where you learn what happens next. The Emperor stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. I have a problem, Miss Ashford. My aristocracy is financially inept, politically complacent, and increasingly irrelevant to actually running the empire. My merchants and bankers, people like you and your father, have become the real power behind imperial commerce and infrastructure. But I cannot simply replace the nobility without triggering civil war. So I maintain the fiction that they matter, while quietly letting capable commoners do the actual work. That fiction just became very expensive, Evelyn said. Because you made it expensive. The Emperor turned to face her. Which brings me to my proposal. I am going to grant you a title, Countess Ashford. In recognition of your contributions to imperial trade and infrastructure, you will receive lands, position, and formal noble status. Evelyn's mind reeled. A title. He was offering her everything Adrian had spent 3 years stripping away. In exchange for what? In exchange for stability. The Emperor returned to his desk. You will use your commercial networks to quietly resolve this debt crisis without further damage to the aristocracy. You will cease any actions that could be construed as targeting Duke Blackthorn specifically, and you will serve as an example that the Empire rewards exceptional commoners with opportunity rather than persecution. And if I refuse, then I will have no choice but to treat your recent actions as economic rebellion against the crown. Your assets will be seized, you will be tried for treason, and your uncle will likely be implicated as well. The Emperor's voice was not unkind, just matter of fact. I am giving you a path forward, Miss Ashford. I suggest you take it. Evelyn sat very still, processing the impossible choice. Accept a title, save herself, become part of the system she had spent 3 years fighting against. Or refuse, lose everything, and probably die for the principle that commoners should not have to bow to people who did nothing but inherit power. Power is not actually about winning, she realized. It is about surviving long enough to define what winning means. I accept your offer, Your Majesty, Evelyn said quietly. On one condition. You are not really in a position to make conditions? Nevertheless, Evelyn met his eyes. Duke Blackthorn's petition for annulment claimed I failed to produce an heir. I want that specific language publicly corrected. The annulment can stand, but the record needs to reflect that the failure was mutual, not my inadequacy alone. Why does that matter to you? Because someday, when people tell the story of how I became Countess Ashford, I want the record to show that I was never actually deficient, just married to the wrong man. Evelyn's voice was steel. Small thing for you to grant, essential thing for me to have. The Emperor studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Done. The annulment records will be amended to reflect mutual incompatibility with no fault assigned. Anything else? No, Your Majesty. Then we have an agreement. The Emperor extended his hand, and Evelyn shook it, sealing a bargain that felt simultaneously like victory and defeat. The formal announcement will be made at the summer gala in 6 weeks. In the meantime, quietly start resolving the debt crisis. I do not care how you do it. Just make it stop before I lose half my peerage to bankruptcy. Evelyn stood to leave, then paused at the door. May I ask a question, Your Majesty? You may ask, why did you really give me this title? It cannot just be about stability. You could have arrested me and resolved the crisis through imperial decree. The Emperor smiled, an expression that held decades of political calculation. Because Duke Blackthorn came to me personally and demanded I destroy you. He spent 2 hours explaining why you were a threat to the Empire, why merchants like you needed to be kept in check, why the natural order required your elimination, and listening to him, I realized something important. What? That any man stupid enough to throw you away in a storm and then be surprised when you came back stronger does not deserve protection from his own incompetence. The Emperor opened the door for her himself. My empire needs capable people, Miss Ashford. I do not particularly care if they started as commoners or nobles. Adrian Blackthorne had a wife who could have helped him build something enduring, and he traded her for a pretty face and social advancement. That is not my problem to fix. It is his. Evelyn stepped into the hallway, her mind spinning. She had gone to the palace expecting arrest or execution, and left with a title that would make her untouchable by the same aristocracy she had nearly destroyed. She had become exactly what she wanted to be: powerful, respected, secure. So why did victory taste like ashes? Because somewhere in the transformation from broken duchess to ruthless merchant to imperial countess, she had lost something essential. The woman who had crawled out of that ditch 3 years ago wanted justice, wanted recognition, wanted Adrian to understand what he had destroyed. The woman who accepted the emperor's title had settled for power instead of vindication, had traded her anger for aristocratic legitimacy, had become part of the system rather than breaking it. And there was no going back from that compromise. The moment she accepted that title, she stopped being the woman who challenged the empire and became the woman the empire used to prove it could absorb challenges. Evelyn walked through the palace halls, nodding politely to guards and courtiers who had no idea they were looking at the newest countess in the empire. In 6 weeks, she would be formally presented at the summer gala. Adrian would be forced to bow to her as a fellow peer. Cassandra would have to acknowledge her as social equal. It would be everything she had ever wanted when she was that broken girl in a ditch. It would be nothing like justice. Outside, her carriage waited. Thomas was pacing beside it, his face lined with worry that transformed to relief when he saw her emerge unharmed. "What happened?" he demanded. "What did the emperor want?" Evelyn climbed into the carriage and waited until he joined her before answering. "He wanted to make sure I understood that power has rules, and following those rules is the price of keeping power." "I do not understand. I'm going to be made a countess. In exchange, I stop threatening the aristocracy and start protecting it." Thomas's eyes went wide. "A countess? Evelyn, that is extraordinary. That is everything you lost and more." "Yes." Evelyn stared out the window at the palace growing smaller behind them. "It is exactly what I lost. The same cage, just with a prettier title and more expensive bars. You do not sound happy about it." "I am alive. I am wealthy. I am about to be nobility again." She turned to look at her uncle. "I should be ecstatic. So why does it feel like I just traded one form of powerlessness for another? Because you have finally learned what your father spent his whole life trying to teach you." Thomas's voice was gentle. "The empire does not let anyone win. It only lets you choose which way you want to be trapped." The carriage rolled through the capital streets as rain began to fall, soft and steady. Nothing like the violent storm that had destroyed Evelyn's first life. She thought about the woman she had been, the woman she had become, and the woman she was about to pretend to be. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. A storm was coming. Maybe not today. Maybe not this year. But it was coming because she had learned something that neither the Emperor nor Adrian understood yet. Accepting a cage does not mean you stop planning your escape. It just means you wait for the right moment to break every bar at once. 6 weeks passed like a held breath before drowning. Evelyn spent them dismantling the financial crisis she had created, carefully releasing pressure from the debt trap without letting anyone see the mechanism. Letters to lenders suggesting extended payment terms. Quiet conversations with bankers about restructuring noble obligations. Strategic investments in failing aristocratic ventures that kept them solvent while binding them to her growing network. She saved them. Every single one of the noble houses she had pushed to the brink. And in saving them, she made them dependent on her in ways they would spend years trying to understand. The emperor watched it all with the satisfied expression of a man who had made the right bet. Evelyn Ashford was not a problem to be eliminated. She was a tool to be utilized. A weapon aimed at aristocratic complacency, sharp enough to cut, but controlled enough not to kill. Except Evelyn had never been controlled, only patient. The summer gala arrived with the kind of perfect weather that felt like a threat. Clear skies, warm breeze, the palace gardens transformed into a glittering stage where the empire's elite would gather to witness her transformation from disgraced merchant to Countess Ashford. Thomas had tried to prepare her for it, explaining the protocols and rituals, the careful dance of aristocratic acknowledgement. But there was no preparing for the moment she stepped out of her carriage in a gown that cost more than most nobles spent in a month, and saw Adrian standing at the entrance to the palace, greeting guests as they arrived. He looked terrible. Not obviously so. His clothes were still expensive, his posture still proud, but Evelyn knew him too well to miss the signs. The weight he had lost, the gray threading through his hair that had not been there 3 years ago, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. Cassandra was not with him. That was interesting. Adrian's gaze swept over Evelyn without recognition, then snapped back with the force of a physical blow. His entire body went rigid. She watched him process what he was seeing, the gown, the jewelry, the imperial escort flanking her, and saw the exact moment he understood that something fundamental had shifted. "Lady Evelyn," he said, his voice strained. "I did not expect to see you here. Countess Ashford, actually." Evelyn let the title hang in the air between them like a knife. "As of tonight, the Emperor has been most generous in recognizing my contributions to imperial commerce." Adrian's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment. "Countess, you... how... hard work and competent financial management. You should try it sometime." Evelyn moved past him without waiting for a response, leaving him standing there with the expression of a man watching his nightmares walk through his front door. Inside, the palace ballroom was exactly as she remembered. The same chandeliers, the same marble floors, even the same musicians playing the same careful melodies. But this time, when Evelyn entered, conversations did not stop. People did not look away. Instead, they turned toward her with curiosity and calculation, these aristocrats who spent their lives measuring power and position. They saw someone new, someone dangerous, someone who had clawed her way from commercial obscurity to imperial favor in 3 years. The formal ceremony was mercifully brief. The emperor himself presented her with the title, speaking words about merit and service and the empire's gratitude. Evelyn knelt before him on the same marble floor where she had once danced as Adrian's wife, and felt the weight of a coronet settle onto her head like a crown of thorns. When she stood, she was nobility. Again. Still. Forever, unless another man decided otherwise. The thought made her want to laugh or scream, or both. The receiving line afterward was endless. Noble after noble congratulating her, their eyes calculating what advantage they could gain from association with the emperor's new favorite. Evelyn smiled and thanked them and remembered every face, cataloging allies and threats with the same precision she used on shipping manifests. Lady Morgana Frost appeared halfway through, still beautiful, still cruel, but with an edge of uncertainty that had not been there 3 years ago. Countess Ashford, what a remarkable achievement. I do hope you remember our previous conversations with the fondness they deserve. I remember them perfectly. Evelyn's smile could have cut glass. You suggested I return to trade. You were right. It turns out I am quite good at it. Morgana's eyes flickered with something that might have been fear. I may have spoken hastily. I hope there are no hard feelings. Of course not. Evelyn took a glass of wine from a passing servant. After all, you were simply being honest about what you believed I deserved. I have always appreciated honesty. She moved away before Morgana could respond, leaving the woman standing there with the dawning realization that the merchant she had mocked now outranked her by 2 levels of nobility. The music shifted to a waltz, and Evelyn felt her chest tighten. This had been Adrian's favorite. He had insisted they dance to it at their wedding, at their first anniversary, at a dozen balls when she was still trying to be the wife he wanted. A hand appeared in front of her. "May I have this dance, Countess?" She turned to find a man in his late 30s, dark-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing military dress uniform with enough medals to indicate serious combat experience. She recognized him from the shipping manifests, Lord Captain Eric Ashton, commander of the Imperial Navy's coastal fleet. "I am not sure I remember the steps," she said carefully. "Then we will improvise." His smile was genuine. "I wanted to thank you personally for maintaining our supply lines during that unfortunate debt crisis. Several of my officers were wondering if we would have to start rationing ammunition. Just good business practice." Evelyn took his offered hand and they moved on to the dance floor. Reliable supply chains benefit everyone. They danced in silence for a moment, moving through the familiar patterns. Ashton was a good lead, confident without being controlling. It was such a stark contrast to Adrian, who had always danced like he was proving something. "I heard a rumor," Ashton said quietly, That you once stopped a pirate raid on one of your own ships by negotiating a better deal with the pirates than they could get from selling your cargo on the black market. Eveline felt herself smile for real. I made them a business proposition. They could rob my ship once and make 3,000 marks. Or they could accept a monthly retainer to protect my shipping routes from other pirates and make 2,000 marks every month for as long as they kept their word. And they accepted? They have been my most reliable security contractors for 2 years now. Former pirates make excellent guards. They know all the tricks. Ashton laughed, a genuine sound of delight. You are extraordinary. The Empire needs more people like you, and fewer people like... He cut himself off, but his gaze flickered toward where Adrian stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching them dance with an expression of pure murder. Like Duke Blackthorn? Eveline finished for him. You can say it. We are divorced. Annulled. Whatever the correct term is for having your marriage erased like it never existed. I was going to say fewer people who inherited power they never earned. Ashton's voice was serious. But yes, him specifically. He came to me last month begging for a military contract to shore up his finances. I declined. Why? Because any man stupid enough to throw you away does not deserve to be saved from his own incompetence. The captain's words echoed the Emperor's so precisely that Eveline wondered if they had discussed it. Besides, I had already given all my shipping contracts to the Ashford Company. Best decision I ever made. The song ended, and Ashton bowed formally. Thank you for the dance, Countess. I hope we can speak more about future business opportunities. I would like that. He left, and Eveline was alone again in the center of the ballroom. She could feel eyes on her from every direction. The newly minted Countess, the merchant who had nearly destroyed the aristocracy and then saved it, the woman who had transformed personal devastation into commercial empire. She could also feel Adrian approaching before she saw him. Some part of her had never stopped being attuned to his presence, could track him across a crowded room by instinct. We need to talk. His voice was low, urgent, angry. Privately. Eveline turned to face him, keeping her expression neutral. I do not believe we have anything private to discuss, Your Grace. The annulment was quite thorough in severing all personal connections between us. Do not play games with me. Adrian's hand shot out and grabbed her elbow, his grip tight enough to hurt. You have been systematically destroying my life for 3 years. Do not pretend this is business. This is revenge. Take your hand off me. Eveline's voice was very quiet, very cold. Now. For a moment she thought he would not comply. His fingers tightened, his face flushing with anger and something that looked almost like desperation. Then he saw the people watching, remembered where they were, and released her with a jerky motion. Garden, 5 minutes. If you have any decency left. Decency. Eveline almost laughed. You threw me out in a storm to make room for your mistress, but I am the one who lacks decency. Fine. 5 minutes. Then I never want to speak to you again. She walked toward the garden doors, feeling his presence behind her like a storm cloud. People moved out of their way, sensing the tension, hungry for scandal but too well-bred to openly stare. The garden was cooler than the ballroom, lit by paper lanterns that cast dancing shadows across carefully manicured paths. Eveline walked until they were out of sight of the palace windows, then turned to face the man who had once been her husband. Adrian looked wild in the lamplight, all his aristocratic polish cracking to reveal the desperation beneath. You want to know why I did it? Why I threw you out? I will tell you. I do not care why you did it. Eveline kept her voice steady. I stopped caring the moment Cassandra's carriage splashed mud on me while I was lying in a ditch. She is gone. Adrian's voice cracked. Cassandra, she left 3 months ago, took everything she could liquidate and ran off with some foreign investor, left me with debt I cannot pay and a reputation I cannot repair. And you think I should care about that? I think you should understand that I have lost everything. Adrian's control shattered completely. My money, my reputation, my position, all of it gone because you decided to punish me for choosing someone else. I did not punish you for choosing someone else. Eveline's voice rose to match his. I built a business while you destroyed yours. I succeeded while you failed. The fact that your failure happened to benefit me is just efficiency. You targeted me specifically. Do not pretend otherwise. Yes, I did. Evelyn stepped closer, and Adrian actually flinched. I looked at the man who threw me away like garbage, and I thought, why should he keep everything while I have nothing? So I took it. Every contract, every asset, every piece of your legacy that you were too incompetent to protect. And you know what I learned? What? That you never deserved any of it in the first place. The power, the wealth, the respect, all of it was inherited from better men who died before they could see how thoroughly you would waste it. Adrian's hand flew up, and for one terrible moment, Evelyn thought he would actually hit her. Then he caught himself, his arm trembling in the air between them. "Go ahead," she said softly. "Strike a countess in the imperial gardens. See how well that works out for you." He lowered his hand, something breaking behind his eyes. "What do you want from me? An apology? Groveling? What will it take for you to stop? I want you to understand what you did." Evelyn's voice shook despite her best efforts. "I want you to comprehend that you did not just end a marriage. You tried to end me. You threw me out with nothing because you genuinely believed I was worth nothing, that I would disappear into obscurity and you could pretend I never existed. I was wrong. Were you? Or are you just sorry that I survived?" Evelyn wiped angrily at her eyes, furious at herself for crying. "If I had died in that ditch, you would have danced at your wedding and never thought about me again." "That is not true." "It is exactly true." She was shouting now, past caring who heard. "You would have moved on. Married Cassandra. Had children. Built a life. And the only time you would have remembered me is when someone asked whatever happened to your first wife, and you would have said something dismissive about how the marriage did not work out, and that would have been the end of my entire existence in your memory." Adrian stared at her, and for the first time she saw actual comprehension dawn in his eyes. Not guilt exactly, but understanding. The terrible realization that she was right. "I did love you," he said quietly. "Once, at the beginning." "No, you did not." Evelyn's voice was dead now, all the fire burned out. "You loved the idea of me. The merchant's daughter who made you look progressive and modern. But you never loved me. You never even tried to know me. I am sorry. Your apology means nothing. It changes nothing." Evelyn turned away from him, staring at the lantern-lit garden. "I do not want your apology. I do not want your money, or your groveling, or your pathetic attempts to make yourself feel better about what you did. I want you to live with it, to wake up every day for the rest of your life knowing that you had something real and you threw it away for something pretty and false." "Evelyn, do not speak my name." She cut him off without looking back. "You lost that privilege when you had me thrown out. I am Countess Ashford now. You will address me by title or not at all." The sound of footsteps on gravel made them both turn. 2 imperial guards appeared, flanking a man in administrative robes bearing the Emperor's seal, Countess Ashford, Duke Blackthorn. The administrator's voice was formal. "His Imperial Majesty requests your presence in the private audience chamber. Both of you, immediately." Adrian looked as confused as Evelyn felt. For what purpose? The administrator's expression gave away nothing. "His Majesty did not share his reasoning with me, Your Grace. Only that your attendance is mandatory and urgent." They followed the guards back into the palace, not through the ballroom, but via a side entrance that led to the administrative wing. The private audience chamber was smaller than Evelyn expected, just a simple room with a table and chairs, and the Emperor seated at the head looking grimmer than she had ever seen him. "Sit." It was not a request. They sat, Adrian on one side of the table and Evelyn on the other, with enough space between them for the ghost of a marriage to haunt. The Emperor laid a document on the table between them. "This is a petition I received 3 days ago from Duchess Cassandra Ravel Blackthorn. She is requesting an annulment of her marriage to Duke Blackthorn on the grounds that the Duke's previous marriage was never properly dissolved, and therefore her marriage to him was invalid from the start." Adrian went white. "That is insane. The annulment was legal, certified by the imperial courts." "It was legal," the Emperor agreed. "But Lady Cassandra's lawyers found a technicality. Apparently the annulment petition claimed Lady Evelyn failed to produce an heir due to incompatibility. However, no medical examination was performed to verify which party was actually unable to conceive. Lady Cassandra's petition argues that if the Duke himself is the infertile party, then the grounds for annulment were fraudulent." Evelyn felt her mind spinning. This cannot be real. Cassandra is long gone. She fled the empire. Her lawyers are not. And they filed this petition with full legal standing. The emperor looked between them with something that might have been dark amusement. Here is your situation. If I reject this petition, Duke Blackthorn's second marriage stands, and Cassandra can claim rights to half his remaining assets in a divorce settlement, which will completely bankrupt him. If I accept the petition, his second marriage is annulled, but his first marriage is reinstated because the original annulment grounds were false. No. Adrian's voice was hoarse. You cannot do this. That marriage is dead. That marriage was annulled on potentially fraudulent grounds. The emperor's voice was flat, and since both parties are now of noble rank and present in my palace, I can resolve this matter immediately by ordering medical examinations to determine the truth. If Duke Blackthorn is capable of fathering children, the original annulment stands and his marriage to Cassandra is valid. If he is not, then Lady Evelyn was wrongly blamed, and the annulment is void. Evelyn found her voice. And if I refuse to participate in this farce, then I rule in favor of Cassandra's petition by default, which means your marriage to the Duke is automatically reinstated and you become Duchess Blackthorn again, whether you like it or not. The Emperor leaned back in his chair. So I suggest you participate. The room spun. This was impossible. Insane. 3 years of building a new life and one legal technicality could destroy it all, could trap her back in a marriage she had spent every waking moment trying to escape. When? Adrian asked, his voice dead. When do these examinations happen? Tomorrow morning. Imperial Physicians, full medical court. Results will be sealed and presented to me for final ruling. The Emperor stood, signaling the end of the audience. I suggest you both get some rest. Tomorrow determines which of you gets what they actually deserve. They were escorted back to the ballroom separately. Evelyn found Thomas waiting near the entrance, his face lined with worry. I heard the guards come for you. What happened? Cassandra is trying to invalidate her marriage by proving Adrian's annulment from me was fraudulent. If she succeeds, I automatically become his wife again. Thomas grabbed her arm to steady himself. That is impossible. Annulments do not work that way. Apparently they do when the Emperor wants to make a point. Evelyn watched the dancing continue, all these aristocrats spinning in careful circles, unaware that her entire world was collapsing again. Tomorrow there are medical examinations. If Adrian is infertile, the original annulment is voided, and I am trapped in a marriage I spent 3 years escaping. And if he is not, then his marriage to Cassandra stands, and she can take everything he has left in the divorce. Evelyn felt herself starting to laugh, high and slightly hysterical. Either way, he loses. The only question is whether I lose with him. We can fight this. Appeal to higher courts. There are no higher courts than the Emperor, and he has already made his decision. This is happening. Then we run. Tonight, we take the ships and disappear into the eastern kingdoms. Start over. Evelyn looked at her uncle, at his desperate hope, and felt something inside her shift. 3 years ago, she had run, had accepted being thrown away, had rebuilt herself from nothing because she had no other choice. But she had choices now, power, position, resources, and she was done running. No. Her voice was steel. If they want to drag me back into that marriage, they will have to chain me to it. And the moment they do, I will burn it all down from the inside. Everything Adrian has left, everything the Emperor wants preserved, all of it. I will make staying married to me so expensive and destructive that they beg me to leave. You cannot fight the entire empire. Watch me. That night, Evelyn did not sleep. She sat in her hotel suite, staring at the coronet that proclaimed her a countess, and planned for war. If the medical examination proved Adrian was fertile, she was free. Cassandra's marriage stood, Adrian lost everything in the divorce, and Evelyn could return to her shipping empire without interference. But if Adrian was infertile, if the examination proved that she had been wrongly blamed for their childless marriage, then the annulment was void. She would be Duchess Blackthorn again, legally bound to a man she despised, her commercial empire complicated by aristocratic marriage laws that gave husbands control over wives' assets, unless she acted first. Evelyn pulled out paper and began writing. Letters to her shipping captains with sealed orders to be opened if she did not countermand them within 48 hours. Instructions to Thomas about liquidating certain assets and moving others beyond imperial jurisdiction. Contingency plans for every possible outcome. including the one where she had to destroy everything she built to keep it from falling into Adrian's control. Because if the Empire thought it could trap her again, it would learn what she had spent 3 years becoming, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to burn. Dawn came too quickly. Evelyn dressed in simple clothes, no jewelry, no coronet, just herself. She arrived at the palace medical wing to find Adrian already there, looking like he had not slept either. They did not speak. What was there to say? The imperial physicians conducted their examinations with clinical detachment, blood samples, physical assessments, questions neither of them wanted to answer. It took hours, and through all of it, Evelyn kept thinking about the woman she had been 7 years ago, sitting in this same palace for her first medical examination before marrying Adrian, young and hopeful and stupid enough to believe love meant something. That woman was dead. What remained was someone who understood that love was just another word for leverage, and leverage only mattered if you were willing to use it. The physicians finished their work and dismissed them with instructions to return in 3 hours for the results. Evelyn walked the palace gardens alone, thinking about choices and consequences and the way life kept circling back to the same wounds. She found herself standing in the exact spot where Adrian had grabbed her arm the night before, where they had screamed at each other with all the hatred of people who once tried to love. The lanterns were dark now in daylight, the garden peaceful and beautiful and utterly indifferent to human drama. 3 hours later, she returned to the audience chamber. Adrian was already there, sitting ramrod straight in his chair like a man facing execution. The emperor sat at the head of the table with a sealed document in front of him. "The results are conclusive," the emperor said without preamble. "Duke Blackthorn is fully capable of fathering children. The failure to produce an heir during his first marriage was not due to any physical limitation on his part." Evelyn felt her entire body go cold, which meant the blame fell to her, which meant the annulment grounds were accurate, which meant her marriage to Cassandra stood, which meant Evelyn was free. She should have felt relief, victory. Instead, she just felt empty. However, the emperor continued, "Lady Evelyn has also been examined, and the physicians found no medical reason she could not conceive. Their professional opinion is that the failure to produce an heir was due to other factors: insufficient frequency of marital relations, stress, possibly deliberate avoidance by one or both parties." Adrian's face flushed dark red. "That is a private matter. It stopped being private when you made it grounds for annulment." The emperor opened the document and scanned it. "Based on these findings, I rule that the original annulment was granted under false pretenses. The claim of incompatibility was accurate, but the specific ground of failure to produce an heir was not medically substantiated and appears to have been chosen specifically to place blame on Lady Evelyn." "What does that mean?" Evelyn's voice came out strangled. "It means the annulment is voided. Your marriage to Duke Blackthorn is hereby reinstated, retroactive to the date of original dissolution. You are legally married and have been this entire time." The room tilted. "No, that is impossible. You cannot—" "I can and I have." The emperor's voice was final. "Duke Blackthorn's marriage to Lady Cassandra is declared invalid as bigamy. Any assets transferred during that marriage are subject to recovery, and you, Countess Ashford, are now also Duchess Blackthorn." Again. Evelyn stared at him, then at Adrian, who looked equally horrified, and felt something snap inside her, something that had been holding her together through 3 years of carefully controlled revenge and strategic planning and transforming pain into power. She started laughing, deep, genuine, slightly unhinged laughter that echoed off the chamber walls. "You think this is funny?" Adrian demanded. "I think it is perfect." Evelyn wiped tears from her eyes. 3 years. 3 years I spent becoming someone who did not need you, and you just handed me everything you have left on a legal technicality. What are you talking about?" She turned to the emperor, still smiling that terrible smile. "As Duchess Blackthorn, I have legal standing to act on behalf of the Blackthorn estate, correct? In matters where the Duke is proven incompetent, yes." The emperor watched her with growing interest. "Where are you going with this, Countess?" "I am going to use my position to save my husband from his own catastrophic financial decisions." Evelyn's voice was sweet poison. "I am going to take control of the Blackthorn assets, restructure the debt, and manage the estate back to solvency. Because that is what good wives do. They save their husbands from themselves. You cannot do that. Adrian stood, his chair crashing backward. Those are my family's assets. They are our family's assets. We are married. What is yours is mine. Evelyn felt power flooding back through her veins, and I am going to save every single piece of your legacy. Put it all in trust. Managed by the Ashford Shipping Company, for the good of the Blackthorn name. The Emperor actually smiled. How generous of you, Duchess. This is insane. Adrian slammed his hands on the table. I refuse. I will petition for divorce. On what grounds? You already used incompatibility. You cannot claim the same thing twice. The Emperor stood, clearly enjoying himself now. Unless you want to publicly admit you cannot perform your marital duties, which would be quite the scandal. Evelyn met Adrian's eyes across the table and saw her own future reflected there, bound to him again, trapped in the same cage. But this time she held all the keys. Do not worry, husband. Her voice was venom. I will take excellent care of you. The morning after the Emperor's ruling, Evelyn stood in the master bedroom of Blackthorn Castle for the first time in 3 years. Nothing had changed. The same heavy curtains, the same oppressive furniture, even the same faint smell of expensive cologne that had once made her stomach turn with its false promise of intimacy. Adrian had not returned to the castle. According to the servants, he had taken rooms at a gentleman's club in the capital, refusing to set foot in the same building as his legally reinstated wife. Evelyn did not blame him. If their positions were reversed, she would have done the same. But their positions were not reversed. That was the beautiful, terrible irony of it all. She walked through rooms that had once felt like a prison, her footsteps echoing on marble floors she used to clean herself when the servants whispered that the merchant's daughter should know her place. The portrait gallery where Blackthorn ancestors stared down with painted judgment. The library where she had hidden during Adrian's parties, pretending to read while listening to him laugh with Cassandra in the next room. Every corner held a ghost. Every hallway remembered her humiliation. The castle itself seemed to whisper that she did not belong here. Never had, never would, no matter what legal documents said otherwise. Thomas found her in the East Wing, staring out a window at the grounds where she had walked 3 miles through a storm with everything she owned in a single suitcase. The accountants finished their assessment, he said quietly. The Blackthorn estate is worse than we thought. Adrian owes debts to 17 different creditors. Total outstanding is approximately 90,000 marks. Evelyn did not turn from the window. And the estate's current value? 62,000 if we liquidate everything. The castle, the lands, the family treasures, all of it. So even selling everything, we would still be 30,000 marks short. Yes. Thomas moved to stand beside her. Unless you want to use Ashford Company funds to cover the difference, which is legally permissible now that you are married to him. Evelyn felt a laugh bubble up, bitter and sharp. So I can spend my own money to save the man who threw me away. How perfectly circular. You do not have to save him. You could let it all collapse. Bankruptcy would strip him of his title, his lands, everything. He would end up exactly where you were 3 years ago. Except I would end up there with him. She finally turned to face her uncle. We are married. His debts are my debts. His bankruptcy would be my bankruptcy. The Emperor made sure of that when he reinstated our marriage, then petitioned for divorce, claim abandonment. He has not even tried to contact you since the ruling. On what grounds that would not make me look vindictive? Evelyn crossed to the desk and sat in what had been Adrian's chair, running her fingers over paperwork that detailed the complete collapse of everything his family had built over 2 centuries. I already tried to destroy him through business. The Empire stopped me and forced us back together. If I try to destroy him through divorce, they will just find another way to bind us. The Emperor wants us to work this out, to prove that merit and nobility can coexist. That is not your responsibility. No, it is my cage. Evelyn looked at the numbers again, calculating paths forward with the same precision she used on shipping routes. But maybe cages only trap you if you keep trying to escape. What if I stop fighting the marriage and start using it? What do you mean? She stood abruptly, her mind suddenly clear with terrible purpose. I mean, I take control. All of it. The estate, the debts, the Blackthorn name. Adrian wanted a decorative wife who managed his household. Fine. I will manage it so well he will wish he had let me do it 7 years ago. Over the next 2 weeks, Eveline systematically dismantled and reconstructed the Blackthorn financial empire. She sold the summer estate Adrian had tried to save at auction, using the proceeds to pay off the most aggressive creditors. She renegotiated debt terms with the rest, leveraging her commercial reputation to secure better interest rates than Adrian could have dreamed of. She closed unprofitable ventures and consolidated the rest under Ashford Company management. And through it all, Adrian stayed away. Silent, absent, letting her clean up his mess without offering help or resistance. Until the evening, she received a letter from the Gentlemen's Club, delivered by a servant with nervous hands. The letter was short. "We need to talk, tonight. The garden's at Blackthorn. Please." The please was what made her go. She found him waiting under the same oak tree where he had proposed 7 years earlier, back when she still believed in happy endings and the transformative power of love. He looked worse than at the palace, thinner, older, with the hollowed-out expression of a man who has lost everything, including his right to complain about it. They stood in silence for a long moment. Two people who had once promised forever now, separated by an ocean of wounds neither knew how to cross. "Thank you," Adrian said finally, "for saving the estate." "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did. We are married. Your debts are my responsibility, whether I like it or not." "That is not what I meant." He stepped closer, and she saw his hands were shaking. "I meant thank you for not letting everything my family built for 200 years get auctioned off to strangers. You had every right to let it burn." "I did let it burn." Eveline's voice was flat. "I burned it methodically for 3 years. This is just me putting out the fire before it spreads to my own holdings. Is that really all this is? Damage control?" She wanted to say yes, wanted to maintain the ice that had kept her functional through 2 weeks of managing a dead man's legacy. But standing here, under this tree where she had once said yes to forever, the ice cracked just enough for truth to leak through. "I do not know what this is," she admitted. "I spent 3 years hating you, building my entire identity around proving you wrong about me. And now I am legally bound to you again, managing your life, living in your castle. It feels like a punishment designed by someone with a very sick sense of irony." "I never wanted this," Adrian said quietly. "Any of it. The annulment, the remarriage to Cassandra, the financial collapse. I thought I was making the right choices. Thought I was claiming what I deserved. And what did you deserve? Happiness. Success. A wife who made me feel powerful instead of inadequate." The honesty was so unexpected that Eveline actually flinched. "Inadequate. Is that what I made you feel?" "Every day." Adrian's voice was raw. "You were smarter than me, better with numbers, better with people. My own stewards came to you with estate problems because they knew you would solve them faster than I could. Do you have any idea what that does to a man, to be outshone by his own wife in his own home? So you threw me away." Eveline felt old anger stirring. "Because your ego could not handle being married to someone competent. I threw you away because I was a coward." Adrian's words came faster now, like poison being purged. "Because every time you solved a problem, I could not. Every time you understood something I did not, it reminded me that I was just a title, just a name, that without my inheritance I was nothing, and I hated you for making me see that." The admission hung between them, ugly and honest and more real than anything they had shared in 7 years of marriage. "I never wanted you to feel inadequate," Eveline said after a long silence. "I just wanted to help, to be useful, to prove I was worth keeping, and I wanted a wife who made me feel like I deserved what I inherited instead of one who made me question it." Adrian laughed bitterly. "Cassandra did that perfectly. She never questioned me, never challenged me, never made me feel small. She just took and took until there was nothing left to take. And now you are back to the wife who made you feel small." "No." He met her eyes finally. "Now I am married to the woman who saved me from my own stupidity, even though she had every reason to let me drown. That does not make me feel small. It makes me feel grateful and terrified and so ashamed I can barely breathe." Eveline studied his face in the fading light, searching for manipulation or strategy. But all she saw was exhaustion. A man who had gambled everything on pride and lost. "What do you want from me, Adrian? Absolution? Forgiveness? Permission to stop feeling guilty? I want to know if there is any way forward from here that does not involve us destroying each other." His voice cracked. "Because I'm tired. So tired of fighting and losing and watching everything I touch turn to ash. and you are the only person left who has any reason to care whether I survive this. I do not care whether you survive. The words came out automatic, defensive, but even as she said them, Evelyn knew they were not entirely true. Somewhere beneath 3 years of carefully constructed hatred, there was still a scar where love used to live. Not love anymore, that had died in the rain, but the memory of having loved. The ghost of who they had been before pride and fear destroyed it. Then why did you save the estate? Adrian pressed. Why not let it all collapse and divorce me in the aftermath? Because I'm not you. Evelyn's voice was quiet now, almost gentle. When you had the chance to throw me away, you took it. When I had the chance to throw you away, I chose to save you instead. Not because you deserve it, but because someone has to be better than the worst thing that was done to them. The sun was setting now, painting the garden in shades of gold and blood. Adrian sank onto the stone bench beneath the oak tree, his head in his hands, and for the first time since she had known him, Evelyn saw him cry. She should have felt triumph, satisfaction, the sweet taste of watching her tormentor break. Instead, she just felt hollow, because revenge, she was learning, was not actually about making the other person hurt. It was about making yourself feel less powerless. And standing here, watching Adrian sob into his hands, she did not feel powerful. She felt tired. Evelyn sat beside him on the bench, careful not to touch, and they stayed there in silence as darkness fell around them. Two people legally bound but emotionally shattered, trying to find some way to exist in the wreckage of everything they had destroyed. Finally, Adrian spoke, his voice rough from crying. What happens now? Now, we survive. Evelyn stared at the castle's silhouette against the night sky. I run the estate. You stay out of my way. We maintain appearances at court functions, and maybe, eventually, we figure out how to be two people who share a name without tearing each other apart. That is not a marriage. No, it is not. But it is honest, which is more than we ever had before. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. I do not deserve your mercy. You are right. You do not. Evelyn stood, preparing to return to the castle. But I am not giving you mercy for your sake. I am giving it for mine. Because holding on to hatred is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. And I have spent 3 years poisoning myself. I am done. She walked away, leaving him sitting under the oak tree, and wondered if this was what healing felt like. Not forgiveness exactly. Not reconciliation. Just the slow, painful process of learning to exist in the same world as your wounds without letting them define you. Months passed. The Blackthorn estate stabilized under Evelyn's management. Creditors were paid. The castle was maintained. And slowly, carefully, she and Adrian learned to share space without destroying it. He stayed in the west wing. She stayed in the east. They had dinner together twice a week, formal affairs where they discussed estate business and upcoming social obligations. They attended court functions as a united front, presenting the image of a reconciled marriage. And in private, they maintained a careful distance that allowed them both to breathe. It was not happiness, but it was not destruction either. It was something new, something neither of them had words for. One evening, 6 months after the emperor's ruling, Evelyn found Adrian in the library reading a state report she had prepared. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression made her pause. "These are excellent," he said, gesturing to the documents. "The restructuring plan for the southern properties. I never would have thought to approach it this way." "Thank you." "No, I mean it." He stood, setting the papers aside. "You are extraordinary at this. You always were. I was just too proud to admit it." Evelyn leaned against the doorframe, studying him. "Are you trying to apologize again?" "I'm trying to tell the truth." Adrian crossed to the window, his back to her. "When I married you 7 years ago, I thought I was doing you a favor, elevating a merchant's daughter to duchess, giving you status you could never have earned on your own. I was so convinced of my own importance that I never saw the actual person I married. And now I see you clearly. And I understand that you did not need me to elevate you. You just needed me to stop holding you down." He turned to face her. "I cannot undo what I did. Cannot give you back the 3 years I stole or erase the humiliation. But I can try to be less of an obstacle to the extraordinary things you're going to do." It was the closest thing to real remorse she had heard from him. Not self-pity, not excuses, just honest acknowledgement of damage done. "I am planning to expand the shipping company into the northern territories," Evelyn said carefully. It will require significant capital investment and use of the Blackthorn name for political access. Will it be profitable? Eventually, after about 18 months of heavy expenses. Then do it. Adrian smiled, tired but genuine. Use whatever you need, the Blackthorn name, the estate's credit, whatever resources will help you build what you are meant to build. Just like that? No questions about risk or return? Just like that. He walked toward the door, pausing beside her. I am not asking to be partners, not asking for forgiveness or redemption or another chance. I'm just asking to be less of a disaster than I have been. And maybe, if I am very lucky, to watch from a distance while you change the empire. He left before she could respond, and Evelyn stood alone in the library, processing words she never expected to hear. It was not love, would never be love again. But it was something, a crack in the wall, a possibility that maybe they could exist in each other's orbit without constant destruction. The expansion into the Northern Territories was brutal. 18 months of negotiation, infrastructure development, and the kind of grinding work that left Evelyn exhausted every night. But Adrian kept his word. He provided access, signed papers, attended meetings where his title opened doors. Her competence then kept open. They developed a rhythm, not partnership exactly, but collaboration. He handled the aristocratic politics while she handled the actual business. He smiled and charmed at court while she moved money and resources. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they stopped being enemies and became something that resembled colleagues. 2 years after the emperor's ruling, the Ashford Blackthorn Northern expansion turned its first profit. 3 months later, Evelyn received a formal invitation to present her commercial model to the Imperial Trade Council as an example of successful noble merchant collaboration. Adrian found her in the estate office the night before the presentation, reviewing her notes for the 100th time. You will be brilliant tomorrow, he said from the doorway. You always are. I'm terrified I will forget something critical and look like an imposter. He came into the room and sat across from her desk. Do you remember our wedding reception? When you gave that speech thanking my family for accepting you into nobility? I remember thinking I had to prove I belonged there. You cried while saying it. Adrian's voice was soft with memory. Not obviously, but I was standing next to you. I felt you trembling, and I remember thinking how strange it was that someone so obviously brilliant was so convinced she was not good enough. I was trying to fit into your world. My world did not deserve your effort. He met her eyes. Tomorrow, do not try to fit into anyone's world. Just be yourself. The woman who built an empire while everyone was betting on her failure. They will either accept it or they will not. But you do not need their acceptance to be extraordinary. The presentation the next day was flawless. Evelyn stood before the Imperial Trade Council and laid out her expansion model with clinical precision. Numbers, projections, risk assessments. Then she pivoted to the larger vision, a commercial empire that transcended the traditional barriers between nobility and trade, where capability mattered more than birthright. The council approved her proposal unanimously. More than that, they commissioned her to develop similar models for 3 other commercial sectors. The emperor himself sent a formal letter congratulating her on demonstrating the future of imperial commerce. That night, Evelyn stood in the castle gardens where Adrian had once proposed and later broken her heart, holding the emperor's letter, and felt something she had not felt in years. Peace, not happiness. Peace was different. Peace was the absence of war with yourself. The quiet that came from finally understanding that you could survive damage without becoming defined by it. Adrian found her there, 2 glasses of wine in his hands. He offered her one without a word, and they stood side by side watching the stars emerge. I have been thinking about something, Evelyn said after a long silence. The emperor forced us back into this marriage as a lesson, to prove that nobility and commerce could coexist, that we could make it work. Have we made it work? I think we have made something work. Not a marriage, not love, but maybe something more honest than either of those. She sipped her wine. We have become 2 people who share resources and goals without demanding things from each other we cannot give. That is a remarkably clinical description of our relationship. It is accurate, though. Evelyn turned to face him. We are not a love story with a happy ending. We are a cautionary tale that learned to become a functional partnership, and I think I am okay with that. Are you happy? Adrian asked, and the question sounded genuinely curious rather than needful. I am building something that matters. I am using skills nobody can take away. I have power that I earned rather than inherited. She considered the question seriously. Happy might be the wrong word. But I am no longer the woman lying in a ditch wondering if she would survive the night. So compared to that, this feels like victory. Even being married to me? Especially being married to you. Evelyn's smile was complicated. Because every time I solve a problem, every time I build something you could not imagine, I remember that the man who threw me away was wrong. Not about us being incompatible. He was right about that. But wrong about me being the problem. Wrong about thinking he could discard people who made him uncomfortable and suffer no consequences. I suffered consequences. Yes, you did, and watching you suffer taught me something important. Evelyn set down her wine glass. Revenge is not about destroying the person who hurt you. It is about becoming someone they could never hurt again. I did not destroy you. I just became indestructible. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of late summer flowers. In the distance, lights glowed from the castle windows. A building that had once felt like a prison and now felt like headquarters, a base of operations for the commercial empire Evelyn was building. I should hate you, Adrian said quietly, for being better than me at everything that matters. But mostly I just feel relieved, like I can finally stop pretending to be something I am not, which is a great man, a leader, someone worthy of the title I inherited. He laughed without humor. Turns out, I am just mediocre, competent enough to maintain what my ancestors built, but not talented enough to expand it. And that is fine. The world needs mediocre people who know their limits. It just does not need them pretending to be extraordinary. That might be the wisest thing you have ever said to me. Pain is an excellent teacher. He finished his wine and set the glass beside hers on the garden wall. I am going back to the capital tomorrow. There is a social season starting, and apparently my presence is required to maintain certain political alliances. How long will you be gone? 6 weeks? Maybe 2 months? Will you be all right here, managing things alone? I have been managing things alone for years. Evelyn felt no bitterness in the observation, just fact. I will be fine. I know you will. He walked back toward the castle, and Evelyn stayed in the garden, breathing in the night air. This was her life now. Not the fairy tale she had imagined at 20, not the revenge fantasies she had nursed at 23, just reality. Complex and imperfect, and sometimes surprisingly functional. 5 years after being thrown out in the rain, Evelyn received word that the emperor wished to see her. She traveled to the capital with a slight sense of déjà vu, remembering the last time she had been summoned to the palace and left with a title that felt like a trap. But this time, the emperor met her in the formal throne room, with the full court in attendance. Adrian was there too, standing among the nobility with an expression that suggested he knew what was coming. Countess Ashford, the emperor's voice carried across the hall. You have been formally recommended for recognition by the Imperial Trade Council, the War Ministry, and representatives from 7 commercial guilds. They cite your innovative restructuring of multiple failing trade sectors, your establishment of reliable supply lines that support our military infrastructure, and your model for noble merchant collaboration as contributing significantly to the empire's economic stability and growth. Evelyn felt her heart start to race. This was not just a formal thank you. This was something else. In recognition of these contributions and your continued service to the empire, I am pleased to grant you the additional title of Trade Minister with full authority over imperial commercial policy. You will retain your position as Countess Ashford and Duchess Blackthorn, while assuming responsibility for shaping the empire's economic future. The court erupted in applause. Not the polite clapping of obligation, but genuine recognition. These aristocrats who had once watched her be thrown away were now applauding her elevation to one of the most powerful positions in the empire. Trade Minister. A position that had never been held by a woman. Never been held by someone with common blood, never been held by anyone under the age of 50. Evelyn accepted the formal documents and seals of office in a daze. When the ceremony concluded and the court dispersed to celebrate, she found herself standing alone in a side corridor trying to process what had just happened. Adrian found her there, leaning against a wall with her eyes closed. "Congratulations," he said softly. "You deserve this." "Do I?" Evelyn opened her eyes. I spent 3 years trying to destroy you out of spite. Hardly the qualifications for imperial trade minister. You also spent 5 years building something extraordinary out of nothing. Twice. That matters more than spite. Adrian moved to stand beside her, both of them facing the corridor rather than each other. The Emperor is not rewarding your revenge. He is rewarding your resurrection. The word landed with unexpected weight. Resurrection. Not redemption, because she had done nothing that needed redeeming. Not revenge, because that had proven hollow. Resurrection. The act of dying and choosing to come back different. I could not have done this without you, Evelyn said quietly. The position, the title, the credibility. It all rests on the Blackthorn name giving me access to places a merchant's daughter could never reach alone. Then we both got something from this disaster of a marriage. Adrian's smile was sad but genuine. I got to watch you become what you were always meant to be. You got the platform to actually do it. Maybe that is enough. Is it enough for you? Being married to someone who does not love you? Love is overrated. He looked at her finally. Respect is harder to find and more valuable. I respect you, Evelyn, more than I have ever respected anyone, and I think maybe that is worth more than love ever was. They stood together in the corridor, two people bound by law and circumstance and the complicated understanding that comes from surviving the worst of each other. The sounds of celebration filtered through from the main hall, but neither moved to join it. I am going to change the empire, Evelyn said, as trade minister. I am going to dismantle the barriers between commercial and noble classes. Make merit matter more than birthright. And it is going to make me incredibly unpopular with your fellow aristocrats. Good. Adrian's voice was firm. Let them be unpopular. Most of them inherited wealth they did not earn and position they do not deserve. If you make them actually work for their status, the empire will be better for it. Even if it means diminishing your own status? My status has been thoroughly diminished already. All that is left is the title and the name. If you can use those to build something better, then maybe the Blackthorn legacy will be worth something after all. Evelyn turned to face him fully, seeing not the man who had destroyed her, but the man who had been destroyed and learned humility from it. He would never be who she needed him to be 7 years ago, but he had become someone she could coexist with, someone who understood that letting go of control was not weakness, but survival. Thank you, she said, for getting out of the way. Thank you for not giving up. On yourself or the possibility that people can change. They returned to the celebration together, husband and wife-in-law, if not in heart, partners in reconstruction, if not in love. And Evelyn understood finally that this was the real ending. Not triumph over Adrian, not even triumph over the system that tried to destroy her. Just the quiet victory of becoming someone who could survive her own story and build something from the wreckage. 10 years after being thrown out of Blackthorn Castle in a storm, Evelyn stood in the same castle gardens where so much had ended and begun. She was 41 now, trade minister of the empire, architect of commercial reforms that had transformed how the realm conducted business. Her shipping company had grown into a conglomerate that employed thousands and operated across 3 continents. And she was alone. Adrian had died the previous winter. Not dramatically. Just quietly in his sleep, worn out by years of alcoholism and the accumulated weight of regrets. They had maintained their strange partnership until the end, respectful, functional, sometimes almost friendly, but never intimate, never truly married except on paper. His will left everything to her, the title, the lands, the Blackthorn name. With a single line of explanation, she earned it more than I ever did. Evelyn scattered his ashes in the garden beneath the oak tree where he had once proposed, where they had later made their fragile peace. And she thought about the strange arc of their story, how love had failed them, but respect had saved them, how the worst thing that ever happened to her had also freed her to become extraordinary. Thomas joined her in the garden, gray-haired now, but still sharp-eyed. "You did it," he said. "Everything your father hoped you would become and more." "Did I?" Evelyn stared at the castle that finally, legally, completely belonged to her. "I built an empire, changed commercial policy for an entire realm, became one of the most powerful people in the kingdom, but I'm standing here alone, scattering the ashes of a man I never truly forgave, wondering if any of it mattered. Of course it mattered. Thomas put his arm around her shoulders. You survived. That alone is extraordinary. Everything else is just proof that surviving was worth it. Eveline leaned against her uncle and let herself feel the full weight of 41 years. The merchant's daughter who had married a duke. The broken woman thrown out in the rain. The ruthless traitor who nearly destroyed an aristocracy. The minister who reshaped an empire. All of those women lived inside her still, their stories layered like scar tissue. She was not happy. Happiness was for people who had never been destroyed and rebuilt. But she was whole, functional, powerful in ways that could not be taken away. And maybe, she thought, watching the sun set over the gardens where her life had shattered and reformed, maybe that was enough. Not the ending she wanted at 20, but the one she had earned at 41, the one that belonged entirely to her. The wind picked up, scattering petals across the grass, and Evelyn Ashford, Countess, Duchess, Trade Minister, and Survivor turned back toward the castle. There was work to be done, trade policies to draft, commercial reforms to implement, an empire to reshape in the image of competence rather than birthright. She had spent 10 years learning that revenge was empty and love was fragile and power was complicated. Now she would spend the rest of her life proving that survival was an art form, and she had mastered it.